Chapter 1141. Zhang Yan sensed that the day of tribulation was approaching. He pondered for a while outside the main hall before returning to the Duzhen hall. He asked Jingyu and found out that there was nothing important happening these few years. Even the Eastern Sea was peaceful. He knew that Tao Zhenren was still refining the Chua dragon's soul and it was not time for him to take action. He knew that there were still many things that needed to be done and that he would be in seclusion for a long time in the future. Thus, he ordered for the Wang sisters, Fu Baoxing, and Yuan Jianqing to be summoned. He patiently guided them for a few months before letting them out. The four of them felt that they had gained a lot after coming out. On the way back, Wang Keting saw that Wang Kaiwei was silent and teased, "What's wrong with sister? Why do you look so unhappy? Did master reprimand you?" "Sigh, it's such a pity that I didn't see it." Wang Kaiwei said in a bad mood, "Sister, when did you see us being reprimanded by master for not cultivating enough?" "I just feel that." At this point, her eyes revealed a trace of worry. Wang Keting asked, "Sister, what do you think?" Wang Kaiwei said, "In the past, master's guidance would only last for a few days, but now it has been a few months." "Sister, did you not notice anything different?" Wang Keting thought for a while and said, "Is there any change inside and outside the mountain gate?" Wang Kaiwei said, "Although master didn't say it clearly, his actions are equivalent to telling us that there will be a storm in the future. Now that the third tribulation has not passed, I have heard that even Taoist Dong Tian might not be able to avoid it. As his disciples, we can't share master's burden, nor can we become a burden. Sister, look at 5th junior brother. His aptitude can't compare to 6th junior brother or 9th junior brother. Even you and I can't compare. This time, he refined a nascent soul Dharma body with master's help. It shows that if we put our heart into cultivation, we still have a chance." Wang Keting lowered her head and said, "Sister's words are not wrong. But even if we cultivate to the third stage, this body has no hope of becoming a heavenly abode. Even if we cultivate to the third stage, what use is there in the tribulations?" Towards the end, her mood was a little down. Wang Kaiwei smiled and said, "When sister came out of Duzhen Hall, did you see those elders who are cultivating outside?" Wang Keting said, "Of course I saw it." Wang Kaiwei said, "Then let me ask you. Most of them are over 100 years old, and some of them are even over 1,000 years old. But why are you still painstakingly cultivating in the palace and not going out to enjoy yourself?" Wang Keting said, "Sister, why do you think this is?" Wang Kaiwei said seriously, "That's because they know that if they cultivate diligently, then they would still have a chance to seek the Tao, but if they give up, then they wouldn't even have that chance." Wang Keting's body shook slightly. Wang Kaiwei said, "These elders clearly know that they don't have much hope, but their Tao hearts are still so firm. We sisters have our master, so our chances are far greater than theirs." Was he going to give up on himself like that? Let's not talk about anything else. If my sister is really fated to reach that stage, as long as she doesn't lose her Tao heart, she will definitely be able to reach that stage. If master saw this, how could he not help us? Upon hearing this, Wang Keting seemed to have made up her mind. She looked up and said, "You are right, sister. If I give up on myself, I really won't stand a chance. After I go back, I will cultivate seriously. I won't be able to achieve Dharmakaya. I won't come out of seclusion." Wang Kaiwei wanted to persuade her not to do so, but on second thought. Her sister's aptitude was actually a bit better than hers. If she could really make up her mind. If she could really make up her mind, it might not be impossible. Thus, she smiled and encouraged her. "Then, sister, you have to work hard." On the southwest coast of Donghua, after the incident with Ping Du sect, Sima Quan felt that it was not safe to continue staying on land. After these years of planning, he gradually moved his base to a hidden island. This place was not far from Donghua continent, and it was on the southwest side of the sea. There were no Xianmen forces there. As for the disciples of the demon sect, ever since he deliberately leaked the method to destroy the six-shade demon sect, no one came to find trouble with him for a period of time. It was just the right time for him to take a breather. At this moment, he was hovering above a large cauldron, and there were 3 jade-like treasured rings floating in front of him. There were also hundreds of demons flying around the rings, and they were constantly spraying mouthful after mouthful of demonic poison into the rings. The rings trembled slightly, and there was a mournful sound coming from within. It sounded like crying and wailing. These 3 items were the 3 rings that were originally beside Wu Ruyang. After he obtained them, he was afraid that Yu Xiao would find out, so he didn't dare to use them. He only locked them up. However, in these few years, he had gathered many treasures from outside. First, he polluted these 3 rings and destroyed the true spirits and consciousness within. He was prepared to refine them again. Now, he was at the last step. After about 4 hours, the 3 rings no longer trembled. However, 2 of them seemed to be unable to bear the weight and shattered one after another. Only the last one didn't. Instead, it emitted a bloody and savage aura. Seeing this, Sima Quan laughed and said, "Looks like my luck is not bad. I finally made one." Before doing this, he didn't have any confidence. He had already thought that he might not succeed, but now that one of the 3 rings was successful, he was already very satisfied. With a wave of his hand, the ring turned into light and entered his sleeve. After Zhuo Daoyan was destroyed, he finally refined another treasure. Moreover, because of the demonic gas, even if he took it out and used it, he wasn't afraid that Yu Xiao or Wu Shi would recognize it. He thought, now that I have a treasure to protect me, there's no need to hide here. Among the Xian men, Mount Li is the weakest. Last time, I didn't succeed. This time, I can go take a look. Within the heaven-mending pavilion, Tan Dingxian was currently refining a gourd-shaped precious artifact within her cave. At this moment, a disciple hurriedly rushed over. Hearing the footsteps, he still looked forward and asked without turning his head, "What's the matter?" The disciple stood behind him and said, "Sect Master, the yin-yang longevity pillar in the back hall seems to have changed." Tan Dingxian didn't think much of it and said, "This pillar has always been strange. You've been by my side for hundreds of years, and it's not the first time you've seen it. Why are you making a fuss?" The so-called yin-yang longevity pillar was refined by the 2nd-generation sect master of Butian Pavilion. It was said that it could distinguish the fate of the sect. There were 2 kinds of gas inside, one white and one black. It was said that if the sect encountered a disaster, the black gas would greatly increase under the reaction of the gas. If there was good fortune, it would definitely lean towards the white gas. However, it was not easy to calculate the fortune and disaster of a cultivator, let alone something like the fate of the sect. This treasure was not always on time. In the tens of thousands of years, it had changed many times, but in the end, it was just a false alarm. This pillar was originally erected in the empty space in front of the hall, but later on, the sect master moved it to the back of the hall. Events had proven that this was a wise move. Last time, when the mountain gate almost fell, it could be considered a great calamity since the founding of the sect. It wasn't that the pillar didn't change, but what made people speechless was that at that time, there was even more white gas. Fortunately, it was not displayed in front of others. Otherwise, it would be a big joke if it was spread out. The disciple bowed down and said, "But this time, the change of the longevity pillar is very different from before." This disciple does not dare to not report it. Tan Dingxian unconsciously frowned, but he still didn't stand up immediately. Instead, he patiently refined the artifact once more before standing up. He walked to the rear hall and looked towards the large glass pillar that stood towering in the empty space. With this glance, he was shocked as well, and he muttered, "How could this be?" He saw that the white gas in the pillar had been continuously pushed back by the black gas. Only the top was left, but it was only 2 fingers wide. It looked like it was about to be swallowed. This was clearly a sign that a great disaster was about to come. Even though he didn't believe in this pillar, he was still a little nervous. He took care of the disciple and said, "Go and summon Elder Bu." The disciple obeyed the order and in less than a minute, Bu Jingsu arrived. He bowed and said, Sect Master Shixiang, what's the matter? Tan Dingxian pointed at the pillar and said, Junior Shixiang, come and take a look. Has this kind of change ever happened in the sect before? Bu Jingsu took a look and said in shock, mystical qi rushing to the top. He calmed down and carefully thought about it. He said, this kind of situation has never happened in the sect before. According to the sect's records, it was at most half a pillar in one breath. Tan Dingxian said, oh. That time, was the white gas winning or the black gas surging? Did something happen in the sect? Tell me in detail. Bu Jingsu hesitated and replied, that time, the white gas was surging, but it was because the fourth-generation sect master's wife passed away and found a young and beautiful female disciple to be her cultivation companion. After that, the pillar was moved to the back of the hall. Tan Dingxian snorted. He flicked his sleeve and said, nonsense. What does this have to do with the monastery? Bu Jingsu hesitated for a moment and said, even though this pillar works sometimes, but with the tribulation ahead, and this kind of strange sign has never happened before, I think we should believe it rather than ignore it. Tan Dingxian said, then what do you think we should do, Junior Shixiang? Bu Jingsu was also in a difficult position. How could he come up with any ideas in such a short amount of time? He could only say, you can order this disciple to look around and see what the sects have been up to recently. Tan Dingxian agreed with this method, but before he could give the order, the two of them suddenly sensed something and looked out of the sect gate. They saw a bright golden light rising from the East Flower continent. The golden light illuminated the sky, and the qi shot out like arrows. They listened carefully and heard the sound of bells and cauldrons. At the same time, the two of them felt their feet sink slightly. They knew that the spiritual qi of heaven and earth had been taken by someone. Tan Dingxian said with a gloomy face, someone has achieved the heavenly abode. Is that direction the Yuanyang sect? Bu Jingsu looked around and said, yes, sect master Shixiang is right. It is indeed the Yuanyang sect. I have long heard that the eldest disciple of this sect, Xiao Zhengdao, has the potential to achieve great things. It should be this person. As he said this, he thought of something and said, Senior Shixiang, could it be that the sign of the longevity pillar is because of this person, or the Yuanyang sect? Tan Dingxian frowned and took 2 steps forward. He said in a deep voice, the Yuanyang sect is indeed a big variable. I heard that the Bai temple master of the Yuxiao school personally went to persuade them, but he came back empty-handed. Junior Shixiang is right, we can't ignore this matter. You will temporarily take charge of the sect for the next few days. I will personally go to the Mo Chiu cliff. Chapter 1142. Under the eye of the West Ocean, where the fire vent was located, there was a sea of lava and smoke. The flames were like the sun, extremely hot. At this moment, a scarlet light broke through the sea of fire and rushed to the sky. After a few miles, it turned to the side and landed in a cave. The light dispersed and Huxian walked out. He sat cross-legged on a big rock and in a few breaths, he retracted the strong mana on his body. He took out a thumb-sized elixir jade from his sleeve and placed it in front of him. Then, he breathed in and out and regulated his breathing. When he came out of meditation, the elixir jade had already turned into a pile of dust. At this moment, he could not help but nod his head, his eyes filled with joy. Every time he came back from the fire vent, he could feel his mana growing slightly. This kind of progress was much faster than sitting in the mountain gate and cultivating. He thought to himself, there is a lot of fire essence and polar land gold here. As long as I refine them and integrate them into my gold and fire chi, the day I refine them, the power of my supernatural powers will be comparable to the past sages of the sect. At this moment, he suddenly felt a wave of energy. He turned around and saw a ball of spiritual light on the cave wall. His expression changed and he stood up unconsciously. This was the entrance to the Xianyuan cave that Zhang Yan had set up. Although he had kept away the talisman and the deep pond heavy water, this door was still there. However, because it was not used for people, it was only for the heavy water to pass through, so it was only the size of a palm. After Huxian walked a few steps closer, a beam of light flew out from the cave. It shot out 3 feet and stopped. He stretched out his hand to take a look and saw that it was a talisman. He took it and opened it. He could not help but frown as he thought, so the opening day of the tribulation is near. Looks like time waits for no one. I must reach the second stage before the tribulation, or else I will not be a protector of the mountain gate. Even my life might not be safe in the tribulation. In the Xianyuan cave, Zhang Yan saw that the letter had been sent out. He stretched out his hand and the door of the cave collapsed. It would be fine if the door was set up in a place with abundant spiritual opportunity. It could be nourished from time to time, but placed under the eye of the sea, it would be leaking spiritual opportunity, and one would need to expend mana to maintain it. Right now, he needed to open another door in the mountain gate so that he could conveniently take out the abyssal heavy water. Thus, after informing Hu Xian about this matter, he left the place. He cast a spell and lightning flashed. His body flashed and he arrived at the outer hall of the Duzhen Palace. He took a few steps forward and sat down cross-legged in front of a prepared psychic jade wall. Then, he connected to the heavenly abode. Not long after, a bright light floated out from the surface of the psychic jade wall. Then, it slowly stretched outwards. With the help of his spiritual opportunity, after about a month, the entrance and exit of the world gate was finally established. Following the sect master's orders, he took out the dragon's soul essence and transported it to the storehouse. It was only because this place was the floating heavenly palace, which was built by the great underworld patriarch and was heavily guarded, that such an object could be placed here. If it was a normal hall, it would have collapsed under the pressure of the water. After 100 days, Zhang Yan finally took out 1,000 buckets of abyssal heavy water. As for the rest, the mountain gate didn't have much use for it. He could use it to train his cultivation. After that, he returned to the Xuanzi ocean world. Once he sat down, he started to think about how to improve his cultivation and combat ability. Apart from cultivation being the most important, refining the earth-splitting heaven and earth-splitting leaf was the most important thing. This treasure had used the spine of the dragon god to refine itself into a treasure embryo. Looking at it now, the spiritual light within was about to be released. It seemed like it wasn't far away from refining the true treasure. However, whether or not it could be completed before the tribulation was something he couldn't judge. As for how to make the true treasure as soon as possible, there had been many attempts by Venerable Dong Tian, but very few of them succeeded. In this aspect, he had already done his best. After all, the spine of the dragon was a unique item in the world. Other methods couldn't be compared to it. Hence, he could only do it step by step and carefully nurture the treasure. Right now, if he used all his techniques in battle, it would be enough. However, after the battle with the demon locust, he felt that he needed to add as many techniques as possible. The sun-swallowing green locust was an ancient sky demon. It possessed the 3 evils and 3 techniques, and it had been refined into one with the origin bead. Coupled with the protection of the essence evil, it was almost invincible. However, such a powerful demon was still defeated by the cultivators. No matter how strong his spiritual power was, after the tribulation, who knew how many opponents he would meet? If he fell into a chaotic battle, no matter how much spiritual power he had, he wouldn't be able to use it. It was so much so that you might not even need to use any divine abilities before you would be in danger. At that time, you would need to use swift moves that could counter your opponent's moves in time. He thought for a while and took out the book that Shin Chong had left behind. There were several powerful talismans recorded in it, and the sword talisman that he had used in the past was one of them. Other than this talisman, there were also some refined talismans that were also quite powerful and could be used. No matter which talisman it was, the cost of the precious materials needed was huge. The Guangyuan sect didn't have a strong foundation and could only rely on Shinchong to search around. Although he managed to make it, it was only 1 or 2. As the 3rd hall master of the Qinsang school, Zhang Yan didn't care about these precious materials. He only needed to tell them what he needed and the sect would naturally offer it. However, if he just copied it, it wouldn't be to his liking. Once Shinchang's talismans were refined, they could be passed on to the younger generation. However, if he couldn't survive the tribulation, what was the use of leaving behind the talismans? After thinking for a long time, he took out another paper and pen and wrote a different method of refining talismans. This was based on the original foundation and changed some precious materials. He only pursued the talisman's power and didn't care if it could be kept for a long time. He called Jing Yu over and handed the talisman to him. He instructed, follow the records on this and order the people below to quickly send these precious materials to the Duzhen Hall. Jing Yu bowed and took it, I understand. With the help of Shaoqing, the Qinsang school had a mountain of precious materials and external medicine. With Zhang Yan's order, it only took 2 to 3 days for all the necessary items to be prepared and sent up. If it was Guang Yuan, he didn't even dare to think about it. After Zhang Yan got the precious materials, he used 7 to 8 days to refine a few of each talisman. After trying it out, he was satisfied with its power. Thus, he made some changes on the talisman and told Jingyu, take it. Have the elders on duty outside the hall refine 10 of them each. They need to be done within 10 years. Other than some crucial parts that he had to refine himself, he didn't plan to do the rest of the steps himself. Instead, he left it to the elders outside the Duzhen Hall to do it. He could free himself and have more time to cultivate. Just as he was thinking about what other methods he could use, the formation spirit appeared in a flash and bowed. Master, someone from the upper extreme hall is here, requesting to see you. Zhang Yan thought about it and knew that it must be Qi Yuntian. He said, call him in. Not long after, a person came in. It was Qi Yuntian's personal disciple, Guan Ningyue. He came up and bowed respectfully, greetings, Hall Master Du Zhen. Zhang Yan said, did senior brother Qi ask you to come? Guan Ningyue hurriedly said, yes, Master is going to refine the Heavens United Divine Water Forbidden Light. It's just that I can't do it by myself, so I want to invite Hall Master Du Zhen to refine it together. Master said that he can give half of the divine water to Hall Master Du Zhen after that. Zhang Yan smiled and said, you came at the right time. This Heavens United Divine Water Forbidden Light was a secret light forbidden technique passed down in Qinsang school. It was like the thunder bead in Yuanying state, it had great killing power. However, because the light was too overbearing, only the successors of the Profound Water Palace were allowed to refine it. This time, Qi Yuntian invited him to do this, it must be because he was instructed by the sect master. In order to deal with the upcoming human tribulation. He said cheerfully, since senior brother Qi has invited me, I will go with you now. In the Inata temple, the sect master Pu Xianxing stood beside the 10,000 lightning pool and looked at the raging thunder fire in the pool. His gaze was deep. The most powerful treasure in the monastery was none other than this pool of lightning. However, the cultivators in the sect needed to cultivate to the point of forming a nascent embryo before they could refine this pool of lightning. It was a pity that after the patriarch's death, the pool of lightning had been destroyed. It was a pity that after the founding master, no one in the temple could reach such a cultivation level. This was because the Inata temple had been fighting against the demonic sect for a long time. Many outstanding disciples had died on the way to killing the demonic sect before they could cultivate to a high level. Moreover, the Inata temple was not a big sect and lacked many cultivation materials. In addition, the demonic sect was very afraid of them and often suppressed them, so it was hard for them to grow stronger. As the sect master, Pu Xianxing knew that there was actually another way. Even if one's cultivation level was not high enough, one could still refine the pool. The founding master once left a talisman in the pool. As long as the descendants killed a demonic sect grotto heaven, they could take its qi and soul and throw it into the pool. Then they could take the pool for their own use. Although the previous sect master had thrown Jinren Ru Huang's soul into the pool to refine, it was not killed by the cultivators of the Inata temple, so the talisman was not activated. However, how difficult would it be to do that? Unless they initiated a fight between grotto heavens or sects, it was not something that the Inata temple could handle. Fortunately, there was always a way out. There was an opportunity in front of him. A rainbow flew over from afar and landed beside him. Jinren Pang waved his conveyance light and went forward. "Greetings, sect master." Pu Xianqing said, "Did you find out?" Jinren Pang said, "With the permission of Pingda's sect, I ordered my disciples to search around and finally found the lair where the demon once resided. However, it looked like it was destroyed. They were afraid that someone would come after them, so they fled first." Pu Xianqing said, "That day, under the light of the mirror, I sensed that there seemed to be a sky demon's demonic spirit hiding in it. It seems like it is true. Did you find out where it went?" Jinren Pang replied, "I ordered a few disciples to search on the spot. I guessed that it might still be hiding nearby. However, the sky demon is cunning, so we still need to find out." Pu Xianqing thought for a moment and said, "It is hard for the disciples to do this. However, as the sect master, it is not appropriate for me to leave without permission. Junior apprentice sister, please go personally." Jinren Pang immediately accepted the order, but he raised his head and asked, "Senior apprentice brother, is the situation so urgent that we can't wait any longer?" Pu Xianqing shook his head and said, "A few days ago, I exchanged letters with sect master Qin of the Qinsang school. In his words, he asked me to prepare early. Originally, after another 200 or 300 years, I might be able to break through the 6 barriers and have a chance to refine this pool. Unfortunately, the situation is getting dangerous now. If I want to survive, I have to rely on the founding master." Jinren Pang nodded silently and said, "I will go now." Pu Xianqing half turned around and looked at her, saying, "I trust you. You can bring the demon subduing mirrors with you. If you see any traces of the demon, try your best to capture it." Jinren Pang bowed and left first. After returning to the cave abode, she called a disciple and said, "I have something to do and I don't know when I will return. Jean is still in seclusion. When I am not around, don't disturb her. You will be in charge of the cave abode first. If you can't make up your mind, go and discuss it with Shutong." The disciple obediently accepted the order. After Jinren Pang explained clearly, she went to the hall to invite the demon subduing mirrors down. She then hid her qi dynamic and left the mountain gate, heading toward the southwest of Donghua continent. Because this was the territory of Pingda's sect, and they were allies, out of courtesy, she had to pay a visit first. After meeting Jinren Zhao and Jinren Wu, she stayed in the sect for a day. On the second day, she left. Not long after she left the white jade platform, she saw a big lake in front of her. This was the crater that was created by Zhang Yan's palm. However, Jinren Zhao and Jinren Wu used their mana to move the water and soil over, which was why it became like this. She stood on top of a cliff by the lake, took out a spell, and called out in her heart. The disciples of Huanjin Temple who were still investigating there immediately felt it. Either their accessories vibrated, or they had a sudden impulse. They knew that it was the call of their master, so they immediately flew over. Within half an hour, there were more than 10 rays of light that flew over and stopped in front of her. After all the disciples came up to greet her, Jinren Pang asked, "You have been investigating for so many days, did you find anything?" A female disciple stepped out and said, "Jinren, we found traces of many disciples of the devil's doctrine nearby. From the looks of it, they all went to the sea. I don't know if it has anything to do with the sky demon. Because the devil's chi is heavy, we can't handle it, so I stopped all my junior brothers and sisters. If you delay the sect's business, I am willing to bear all the punishment." Jinren Pang praised, "What crime? You found the enemy in front of you, but you still rushed over. That is not bravery, but stupidity. What happened here has nothing to do with you. Go back to the mountain gate as soon as possible." All the disciples bowed and accepted the order. After saying goodbye, they all left. Taoist Pang made a hand seal and raised her 2 fingers in front of her eyes. She instantly opened her Dharma vision and looked around. In her eyes, she saw a faint trace heading south. It was exactly as the disciples had said. Thus, she tapped the ground with the tip of her toes and turned into a conveyance light, chasing after the trace. Chapter 1143. Spiritual Master Pang chased the devil Qi all the way to the edge of the sea. Here, the devil Qi suddenly sank, as if it had sunk deep into the ground. As she had expected, the disciples of the devil sect lived in a place that needed to be close to the turbid Qi and refine the devil Qi, so it had to be underground. However, with the terrain here, there was no sign of turbid Qi gathering, especially in the face of the tide, where the mountains and rivers didn't gather and the vegetation didn't flourish. She lowered her head, and a ray of light appeared in her eyes. In an instant, it penetrated thousands of feet underground. She searched back and forth for a moment, but found nothing unusual. Even though she didn't gain anything, she didn't stop because of this. She raised her sleeve and rubbed the back of her hand, causing the image of a strange beast that was shaped like a glazed jade snake to appear. With a command in her heart, it leaped out and transformed into a ray of light that charged underground. This was the secret technique of her Inata temple, spirit manifestation method. After a cultivator learned it, they could visualize a devil-subduing spirit creature in their heart. When they refined it, they didn't add any metal, stone, or vegetation. Instead, they drew it with their mind and drew it with lightning. With the nourishment of the righteous Qi of heaven and earth, it would develop a spiritual body and feed on the devil Qi. In the beginning, because of their shallow cultivation, they could only rely on clothes. Later on, they could live in the flesh and soul. As the cultivator advanced, their power would become stronger and stronger. Spiritual Master Pang was at the second stage of the elephant phase realm. He had 6 devil-subduing spirit beasts, which were usually hidden in his limbs and torso. This was the spirit hidden in his right arm. Now that he released it, it was usually used to track the enemy. The glass jade snake spirit statue didn't have a physical body. After entering the ground, it penetrated through the rocks and mud without any hindrance. Soon, it was 10,000 feet underground. In less than half an hour, it found a narrow tunnel. It went inside along the way. As it was moving forward, suddenly, hundreds of devil Qi flew out from the stone walls on both sides. They all pounced and bit it. The glass jade snake just coiled its body and sucked in all of it. When it stretched out again, all the devil Qi was gone. The spiritual light around it was even more dazzling, as if it had swallowed a good tonic. On the surface, Spiritual Master Pang's eyes lit up. He said coldly, "This is the devil's Denver." She took out a jade plate from her sleeve. There was a round hole in the center, and if one were to look at it carefully, it could be seen that there were countless exquisite exorcism runes on top of it. The runes were lightly shaken, and a ray of light instantly covered a radius of 1,000 miles. This was a demon-subduing sacrificial ritual that was used to isolate the inside from the outside. At the very least, before this magic tool was destroyed, not a single devil would be able to rush out from the inside. When the glass jade snake reached the end, it bumped into a stone door and was unable to pass through like before. Taoist Master Pang took a few glances and said, "This demon is quite cunning." The door was covered with restrictions, but if it was only set up by the methods of the devil sect, it wouldn't be able to withstand it. She only needed to take out the Inata mirror and she would be able to break it. However, the other party had actually used the Xianmen method here. It was indeed very crude. However, it wasn't something that could be broken with just a visualization fey. This is most likely the Sky Devil's Denver. He set up the Xianmen method because he was afraid that the people from the devil's sect would come looking for him. After thinking for a while, she took out a paper talisman and let it float on the ground. Then, she took out a porcelain bottle and poured out a few drops of red blood. She dipped the tip of her finger in it and bent down to draw a few runes on the talisman. Then, she pressed her palm on top and channeled her mana. There was a rumble. The entire cliff shook, and a beam of golden light shot out. In an instant, it pierced through the ground. She moved her palm away, and there was already a round hole that was about an inch wide. She straightened up and blew out a breath of fresh air. Immediately, a ray of rainbow light flew out and entered the cave. It went straight down and soon arrived in front of the cave's stone door. Suddenly, an idea came to her mind and she formed a doppelganger. This clone stood in front of the cave and looked up at the jade pendant hanging high above. There was a faint flash of lightning in his eyes, and with a crack, it broke and fell. At the same time, a disciple who was peeping out of the cave suddenly let out a miserable howl. He covered his bleeding eyes and shouted, Quickly go and report to Senior Sister Hui Xiao, there is an expert from the mysterious gate outside the cave. Hearing his words, the disciple beside him panicked. He hurriedly took out a talisman and threw it deep into the cave. A black light flew out. After a loud noise, the restriction collapsed and the stone door collapsed. Taoist Master Pang's clone walked in and saw a few Devil's Sect disciples running in all directions. She glanced at them and did not pay much attention to them. These people's cultivation was extremely low, and to her, they were no different from insects and ants. She could wipe them out with a wave of her hand. She had a more important goal at hand, so she did not pay attention to them. Instead, she walked towards the boundary where she sensed the strongest devil chi. In the depths of the Immortal's cave, Hui Xiao had already received the report and knew that someone had charged in. However, that place was very far from where she was, and there were still 6 layers of restrictive spells set up in between, so she did not panic. She summoned a devil head with a hand seal and asked, Master Qing, do you know the identity of the person who has come? This demon called Master Qing was left behind by Sima Quan, and was specially used to instruct his disciples in cultivation and to guard the cave. It had already developed its own intelligence. It knew everything that Sima Quan knew. It was not a muddle-headed demon that only knew how to act according to its demonic instincts. It said, based on the person's methods, he is a cultivator from Huanjin Temple. Huanjin Temple. Hui Xiao's body trembled. Before Sima Quan entered the sect, she was merely a disciple of a small devil sect, so she naturally had some fear towards this sect that was most proficient in the art of subduing devils. She forced herself to calm down and asked again, how is the person's cultivation? Master Qing said, the person seems to be Pang Yunxiang, the Taoist of Dongtian from Huanjin Temple. The one that entered the cave should be her clone. The Taoist of Dongtian? Hui Xiao's face was pale and her face was filled with horror. Her body trembled uncontrollably. Even if it was the clone of the Taoist of Dongtian, it was comparable to a cultivator in the 3rd stage of Yuanying. It could easily slaughter all the disciples here. She said anxiously, Master, this cave will be difficult to protect. Staying here is just waiting for death. I need to leave as soon as possible. Master Qing said indifferently, 1,000 miles radius is locked by a secret technique. Even I can't communicate with my master through spiritual thoughts. You can't get out. However, Hui Xiao cried out, no, there's another way out. I know there's another way out. She walked quickly to a well and hurriedly took out a talisman and threw it into the well. In just a moment, the water's surface rippled and Fang Xin En's figure appeared. He cupped his hands and said, Senior Apprentice Sister, why are you looking for me? Hui Xiao tried her best to look calm and said, Junior Apprentice Brother, there's a great enemy in the cave. I need to borrow your cave to hide. Fang Xin En's thoughts turned quickly and he smiled, the person who came must have great means and can be compared to Master. Otherwise, Senior Apprentice Sister wouldn't be so anxious to hide in my cave. Hui Xiao saw that he guessed the truth in an instant. She didn't care about hiding anymore and pleaded, no matter who it is, please save me for the sake of us being from the same sect. Fang Xinan said seriously, if I open the door to the cave, the fact that this cave is occupied by Master will definitely be leaked. Hui Xiao said with a trembling voice, Junior Apprentice Brother, are you not going to save me? Fang Xinan chuckled and said, I haven't finished speaking. Senior Apprentice Sister, you are deeply trusted by Master. If you are captured, it is very likely that you will be interrogated about many matters of the sect. That will be even more disadvantageous to Master. In order to protect the sect's secrets, it seems that I still have to let you in. He didn't know about the so-called matters of the sect. However, Hui Xiao was very clear that he was hiding here. If he didn't let her in and the person who came found out and the news spread to the cultivators of Yuxiao school, he wouldn't be able to protect this precious place for cultivation. At this moment, Master Qing said, the person who came has already broken through the 4 forbidden gates. At most 20 breaths will be here. Hui Xiao was anxious and afraid. She stomped her feet and said, Junior apprentice brother, whatever you say. Why don't you quickly open the door? Fang Xinan said, when I was talking to senior apprentice sister, I was already thinking of ways to open the door. It's just that my skill is shallow and my cultivation is not good enough. Although I have the entry token, I still need to wait for a while. I can't rush it. Hearing him say so, Hui Xiao was helpless and could only wait anxiously. After about 10 breaths, there was a bright light coming from the mouth of the well. She knew that the door was opened. Her eyes brightened and without hesitation, she leaped into the well. The demon master Qing also moved his body and kept the thousands of demons that were still wandering in the hall. Then, he also leaped into the cave. At the moment the door of the cave was opened, Jinren Pang immediately felt something and could feel the clear and righteous qi that was released from inside. She didn't find it strange and urged the clone to speed up. After breaking through the last 2 seals, she came to a spacious cave hall. There was no one here except for a big cauldron in the middle. She immediately recognized the cauldron and sneered, this demon really is hiding here. She waved her hand and the glass jade snake flew in from outside. It circled above the mouth of the cauldron and intercepted the qi activity that Sima Quan left behind. Then, it turned into a ray of spiritual light and returned to the back of her hand. As long as this qi activity was not completely used up, she could use this qi to find the location of the owner. No matter where he escaped to, it would be useless. Even if he had thousands of clones, she could still find him and kill him one by one. She used the secret technique of Anata Temple to check and found that the biggest qi movement was in the north. Without any hesitation, she immediately recalled her doppelganger and rushed towards that direction with a rainbow light. On the other side, Sima Quan had already arrived outside the mountain gate of Li Mountain Sect. However, he did not get close to the mountain gate formation. No one knew what Jinren Yuling had set up, so he would not take the risk. With a call, the demonic ring that he had painstakingly refined flew out. After it grew to the size of a few acres, it spun and disappeared. In reality, it had landed at the foot of the mountain. This ring was the original, qi-gazing ring. However, because it was tainted and refined, its function was also very different. If it faced someone directly, it could increase the power of one's supernatural power by several degrees. If the ring was reversed, once someone stepped into the ring, they only needed to activate the spell and they would unknowingly be tainted by his demonic qi. Chapter 1144. Sima Quan wasn't interested in the junior disciples of Li Mountain Sect. After all, he wasn't a demon who only knew how to kill. He was a demon who was deeply infected with demonic nature. He had his own goals and methods. Sure, he knew that Li Mountain Sect had one more Yuanying cultivator in the 3rd realm. This time, he was going to test the use of this treasure ring on him. As for how to trick him to come down the mountain, it was easy. He just had to order a few demons to stir up trouble in the small sects of Li Mountain and pretend to be the descendant of Shiha. Then, Shen Zixin would definitely pay attention to him. She was the sect master of Li Mountain. In the past, there was no one in the sect to send and she could only run around. Now that there was someone to share her worries, she would naturally send him down the mountain. This way, she would fall into his trap. Originally, he had the idea of seducing Ming Huaping, but later on, this woman's whereabouts were inexplicably unknown, so he didn't waste his efforts. He also had spies in this area and knew that because of the previous upheaval, there were only 5 or 6 small sects left in Mount Li. In just a day, he had found a suitable target and was prepared to start with a sect called Colored Silk Pavilion. Yet, just as he was about to do so, his heart palpitated. He sensed that many of his doppelgangers had disappeared. He suddenly turned and looked toward the southwest. His eyes glowed. Without a doubt, something had happened in the cave abode. The restriction I set up in the cave abode cannot be broken by a Yuanian cultivator. To be able to do so, it must be a cultivator from a grotto heaven. I wonder which sect it is. No matter who the other was, he knew that they were coming for him. At this time, he had to hide and figure out the reason before making specific plans. In comparison, this place in Li Mountain sect was a small matter. He could do it at any time. He decisively took back the chi-gazing ring. Then, he wrapped himself in a yin wind and snuck underground. While the cave abode along the coast was destroyed, his doppelgangers were all over the world. Of course, he didn't forget to set up escape routes. Some of them even his disciples didn't know about. Right now, he was heading toward one of them. However, when he was halfway there, a beam of light shot toward him from South Heaven. It only paused for a moment before heading in his direction. He tried to sense it with his divine will, but his body trembled. That light was not ordinary. Just now, it was getting closer. Even though he was thousands of miles away, he could feel a thunderous roar that made him feel like his spirit was about to scatter. Anjin Temple, Pang Yunxiang. Sima Quan immediately felt that something was amiss. He hastily cut off the connection and changed his direction. However, after a few attempts, the other party was always able to catch up to him. He understood that the other party had some kind of tracking method that he didn't know about. If it wasn't resolved, there would be no peace. But at this moment, he didn't have the mood to fight. The other party's Dao techniques and mystiques were extremely effective against him. If he were to fight, there would be no benefit if he won, and if he lost, he might even lose his life. Moreover, in the Donghua continent, he did not dare to make any big movements. Once his location was exposed, he would not dare to. There was no guarantee that someone would surround and attack him. The fate of Reverend Ru Huang back then was still vivid in his mind. Thus, he turned around, transforming into a formless form, and fled into the depths of the earth. This formless body could easily reach 100,000 feet. However, he didn't believe that the other party would be able to follow him. Who knew that before he could get far, there would suddenly be a ray of light chasing after him from above, forcing him out of the invisible. That feeling was like a person who had been hiding in the shadows all along, but was suddenly exposed under the blazing sun. At the same time, under the light of another mirror, his body was like snow, slowly melting under the light. Sima Quan was shocked and said, "Demon-subduing twin mirrors?" These were the famous demon-subduing twin treasures of Anjin Temple. Back then, the cultivators of the West Continent used them to fight against the Genin demon. No matter what kind of demon or yin spirit you were, under the light of the mirror, you would all turn into ashes. Last time, he had already experienced the power of these two treasured mirrors. He knew that even if he had all kinds of mystiques, he wouldn't be able to defend against this mirror light. He hurriedly shook his body and created thousands of duplicates, escaping from the mirror light and fleeing in different directions. Although Reverend Pang was in the sky, with the help of the intercepted chi, Sima Quan could clearly see what was going on. She took out the Anjin mirror, and with a shake of it, a golden light swept across the land. Wherever the light reached, more than 70% of the demons that escaped were instantly killed. Only 100 or so demons were left, and they were all shocked. They all moved, transforming into formless forms, and fled in panic. At this moment, she took out the divine observation mirror again. She raised the mirror and used the light from the sky to reflect and fall. All the demons were forced to show themselves. At the same time, the light from the Inata mirror fell again and killed more than half of them. However, there were still more than 10 duplicates that escaped, but she wasn't in a hurry. After sensing for a while, she chased after one of them. With the help of the intercepted chi, she only needed to chase after the duplicates that had more chi. As for the weaker ones, she didn't need to care about them. As for whether or not the other party would equally distribute his fa li to each of the duplicates, that was impossible. Things that belonged to demons were the most selfish. If Sima Quan really did that, then each of the duplicates would be their own master, and they wouldn't be willing to combine into one. Therefore, They would definitely be divided into strong and weak ones, which would make it easier to control them. Only when the original main body was destroyed, would the one with the strongest chi turn into the main body. Sima Quan ran all the way, and after a long time, when he saw that Reverend Pang was just about to reach his head, he used the phase reversal technique and immediately entered another clone. If the other party chased after him, he would just have to do the same, and it would be enough to exhaust him. At this moment, Reverend Pang also realized that the wisp of chi had suddenly moved to another place. He understood that the demon had used the phase reversal technique. This kind of Dao technique was compatible with the heavenly devil's body. If he hadn't blocked off all 4 directions, it would have been almost impossible for Sima Quan to be caught. Luckily, she had already predicted this, so before she came, she had already made arrangements. Even so, she wasn't 100% sure that she would succeed. After thinking about it, she felt that this matter was too important, and she couldn't afford to make any mistakes. She still needed to use the power of the sect, so she flicked her finger and sent a talisman to the Huanjin temple. This chase lasted for 7 days and nights. Sima Quan kept using the phase reversal technique to jump back and forth, and Reverend Pang didn't seem to care about the loss of his Fa Li. No matter where his main body went, he would chase without hesitation. Sima Quan gradually felt that something was wrong. Even though he believed that if this continued, he would be able to drag down Reverend Pang, but don't forget that this was the Donghua continent, and he, the heavenly devil, was the enemy of the entire world. If he alerted the sects, the consequences would be obvious. Therefore, he didn't have the mood to go around in circles on the continent, and decided to avoid the sea. But as to which sea to go, he needed to think about it. The north was where the Qinsang school was located, and there were 14 enlightened masters there. Now, the entire north was densely covered with countless spell altars and prohibitions. Most importantly, it was an ally of the Huanjin temple, so going there would be suicidal. To the west and south were where Shaoqing and Yuxiao were, and it was impossible to go there either. There were only 2 directions left, one was to the east, and the other was to the southwest. To the east, he would have to cross the entire Donghua continent, and he would be surrounded by all the sects, so the risk was too great. The southwest was different, however. The Pingdu sect's leader was still in seclusion, and it was his old lair, which was very familiar with. There were also countless underground caves there, which was convenient for hiding. Another step out was the Southwest Sea, and it was full of vitality. Therefore, after thinking about it, he decided to go there. But the first thing he needed to do was to lure the opponent as far away as possible. Therefore, his main body leaped, and he turned into a doppelganger that was heading to the east. Not long after, Reverend Pang caught up again. Sima Quan saw that his plan worked, and after traveling for a while, he used his mana and turned into the doppelganger that was circling in the southwest. At the same time, he used his fastest speed to fly toward the sea. Once he succeeded, he would be able to see the world. But after traveling for 1,000 miles and seeing that he was about to leave the Donghua continent, he felt an inexplicable fear in his heart. He immediately stopped and didn't dare to go forward. He shook his body and created dozens of doppelgangers to look around, but he didn't find anything. Could it be that I'm thinking too much? Just as he was confused, he looked up and saw that the clouds in the sky were shaped like huge rings, and each ring was 10,000 miles wide. He couldn't help but be shocked, and said, could this be the legendary sacrificial ritual of the 8 directions? So the Huanjin temple had already set up a trap, waiting for me to enter. Luckily, I didn't fall for it. He suddenly felt very lucky. This sacrificial ritual was a formation used to kill demons. Normal people could enter and leave without any problems, but once a dirty demon like him entered, it would be very difficult to get out. Since he knew that there was such a setup, he didn't move forward, but waited here instead. After half a day, he saw that the beam of light that had chased him for a few days was flying over again. He laughed coldly, and used the phase reversal technique, wanting to turn to another place. Who knew that just as he was about to do so, his vision suddenly blurred. When he looked around again, it was all clouds, and he couldn't see heaven and earth. Standing here, he couldn't sense any of his original doppelgangers. Just as he was shocked, he saw a Taoist standing in front of him. The Taoist was handsome, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "Chi Hung Chan." Chi Hung Chan pointed, and a shadow flashed. It was Jinren Pang who appeared not far away. She looked around, and when she saw Chi Hung Chan, she was also very surprised. She quickly bowed and said, "Sect leader Chi, may I know where this is?" Chi Hung Chan transmitted his voice, "This is a virtual world that I have used the spirit concealment pearl to illuminate. It's not in the present world, not in the outer world, but between the two worlds. Thanks to your sect's help, I was able to sacrifice and refine this treasure. Now that your sect is in trouble, I have to repay you. No matter how I walk here, I can only go around within 1,000 miles, and the demon will definitely not be able to escape with the phase reversal technique. I think I can help you, Jinren. However, you have to remember that after 2 hours, the light will recede. Whether I am willing or not, the two of you will return to the present world." Jinren Pang's face was filled with joy. He bowed and said, "Thank you for your help, sect leader Chi. 2 hours is enough." Chapter 1145. While the two of them were talking, Sima Quan had already flown out. However, he soon felt that something was wrong. He could only go out for 1,000 miles at most. This distance was only a step for the people of the heavenly abode. Moreover, they were all under the cover of the twin demons subduing mirrors. As long as the opponent used the mirrors, there was nowhere to hide. He would only die. However, after waiting for a long time, he didn't see the light of the mirrors. He couldn't help but be surprised and thought to himself, could it be that I can't use the mirrors here? Thinking of this, he felt his spirits lift. He also realized that Chi Hung Chan was nowhere to be seen. Without the Pingdu sect leader, he only had to deal with Pang Yunxiang. This meant that he wasn't really at the end of the road. He might still have a chance to escape. Thus, his body trembled, and thousands of devils appeared, howling as they charged forward. Meanwhile, his figure flickered, disappearing into nothingness, secretly observing from the side. As long as he could sneak into the other party's knowledge sea, he would win this battle. Spiritual Master Pang didn't use the mirrors because he was ordered to capture Sima Quan alive and use him as a sacrifice to the 10,000 lightning pool. Since the opponent was trapped here and there was only void chi around her, no matter how she used her magic power, it wouldn't affect the continent. It was convenient for her to use her methods. Seeing Sima Quan's figure disappear, she used her magic power and opened her law eye. In her field of vision, she saw a ball of obscure essence chi hiding 1,000 miles away. It didn't rush over with the demons. Thus, she spread out her 5 fingers, and lightning immediately appeared in her palm. With a thunderous sound, the devils that were charging at her were blown to pieces. However, she knew very well that this was just to attract her attention. As expected, a cold wind blew from the right. She tilted her head slightly and a picture of a pai xiu appeared on her neck. She opened her mouth and swallowed the foul air. There was no sound here, but it was quiet behind her. This time, it crashed into her without any obstructions. However, the moment it touched her Taoist robe, a ball of spiritual fire flew up. With a miserable howl, the demon turned into a pile of ashes, and the spiritual fire weakened slightly. Her Taoist robe and accessories were all specially refined. Even the invisible demon wouldn't be able to get on him before the robe was damaged. Just now, with this test, Sima Quan, who was hiding at the side, could see that normal methods were useless against this Anata Temple female cultivator. Furthermore, there wasn't much room to maneuver in this place, so he couldn't display his advantage of being able to fly quickly. The only advantage he had was that his opponent had spent more transcendence energy than him after running for several days and nights. If it was an ordinary cultivator, they might be able to compete with him in magic power and divine abilities. However, it was different for the cultivators of Huanjin Temple. It could be said that all their methods were used to restrain demonic cultivators and demonic beings. It was also useful against a demonic cultivator like him. It would not be easy to win in a direct confrontation. Right now, the best strategy was to send his doppelgangers to search for a way out while his main body delayed the battle as much as possible. After making up his mind, he took out the chi-gazing ring and placed it on top of his head. Under a ray of black light, he instantly felt that his mana seemed to have become stronger. Thus, he gathered his mana. He spat out a mouthful of yin energy. All of a sudden, the chilly wind blew, whistling wildly. However, there were no ripples in the surrounding smoke. This was the formless yin wind that he painstakingly cultivated after becoming a sky demon. Even a Taoist paradise Shinran would be tainted by the demonic qi if he came into contact with even a little bit of it. He wouldn't be able to get rid of it within a few hours and would lose his ability to fight back. He originally planned to use it as his trump card, but if he couldn't get out this time, he might be killed. Thus, he didn't care about it anymore. After this mouthful of yin wind came out, he used up more than half of his mana. In addition to the damage he suffered earlier, it could be said that after using this technique, he had completely lost his ability to fight back. Taoist Pang only needed to listen to the sound to identify the origin of the wind. He immediately revealed a vigilant expression, but he didn't panic. The cultivators of Huanjin Temple who were able to form their grotto heavens were all outstanding among the lower generation cultivators. They fought their way up. After forming their grotto heavens, they had to read the Book of Conquering the Demon, which recorded all kinds of Taoist techniques and supernatural powers of the demon sect. It was also recorded in the book about the battle with the Genin demon tens of thousands of years ago. However, she had been prepared for this. She raised her hand and summoned a jade plate into the sky. As soon as it appeared, it immediately froze the yin wind and began to weaken it. It seemed that it wouldn't take long for the yin wind to dissipate. Sima Quan saw that she easily stopped the formless yin wind and his heart skipped a beat. However, although his mana was almost exhausted, he still had some tricks up his sleeves. He suddenly raised his head and blew a few mouthfuls of demonic smoke at the top of the chi circle. Then, a demon with short arms jumped out from the circle. This was a demon that he created by combining the Netherworld Spring Sex technique and the Sky Demon's technique. He also mixed the shards of the sunglasses into it. It looked only slightly different from a normal demon, but it was completely different on the inside. Moreover, it had developed intelligence. Even he himself might not be able to control it. Now that he was facing the cultivators of Huanjin Temple's grotto heavens, he had very few tricks up his sleeves. He had no choice but to release it. When the demon came out, it looked at Sima Quan with a strange look in its eyes. Then, it turned around and rushed forward. As it flew, its figure flickered, as if it was changing back and forth between tangible and intangible. Moreover, its speed was getting faster and faster. Taoist Master Pang also saw that this demon was not ordinary. She didn't dare to be careless. She retreated and took out a jade jar with 2 ears. She opened the seal and dozens of thunderbolts burst out. This was the real demon subduing thunderbolt. Every single one of them was personally refined by her, so its power was needless to say. The moment the thunderbolt came out, Sima Quan immediately felt a stabbing pain all over his body. He was terrified and felt that the thunderbolt was a great threat to him. He quickly retreated and only stopped when he could no longer retreat. At this moment, the demon's subduing thunderbolt had already landed on the body of the demon. However, it was as if it had collided with a shadow. It passed through and didn't touch the demon at all. Sima Quan laughed coldly. That pair of sunglasses belonged to an ancient almighty cultivator. After this demon refined it into the shard, it was instantly destroyed. After the demon refined the shard, it could change between tangible and intangible thousands of times in a single breath. However, both of them had their own ways of restraining it. It was almost impossible to accurately control it. However, it was possible to try luck. However, in a battle of magical powers between cultivators, if they really placed their hopes of winning or losing on luck, then they wouldn't be too far off. Taoist Master Pang also saw some clues. It wasn't difficult for her to guess the changes here. Although she had never seen such a demon before, she had seen many strange secret techniques and naturally had a way to deal with it. She raised her hand and held the corner of her sleeve with her other hand. With a shake of her hand, countless bamboo sticks flew out. They were all small and light, and they fluttered toward the demon's body. These bamboo sticks could only surround the demon's body and were attached to them by thunderbolts. As long as the opponent's body was filled with turbid chi, they would revolve around the demon and continuously slash at it. However, the demon's body was a ball. It changed from the size of a person to the size of a grain of rice. The bamboo sticks couldn't change with it. Because they were affected by the devil chi, they stuck to it one by one. Soon, they all gathered together and looked like bamboo balls. However, because the demon was too small, only a few of them were effective against it. In just a moment, she sensed that the bamboo sticks were disappearing at an extremely fast speed. It was obvious that they were being destroyed one by one. Although this demon-subduing treasure could restrain demons, it would also be worn down by the devil chi. Sima Quan was actually very afraid of this demon because it was very abnormal after being refined. To a certain extent, it even had more potential than him. That was why he wasn't willing to let it out so easily. In his heart, he really hoped to see both sides suffer. Taoist Master Pang pondered and said, "This demon is very strange. It seems to have intelligence. Fighting it is like adding an enemy out of thin air. It won't be a matter of 2 hours to deal with it. Moreover, Sima Quan is here, so there's no need to continue fighting." After thinking about it, she decisively took out the twin demon-subduing mirrors. After the 2 mirrors flew out, they faced outwards and shone at the demon. Instantly, a rainbow of light shot out. As soon as it met, an incomparably mournful scream came from inside. Then, a cloud of black smoke seemed to wriggle under the light. In just 1 or 2 breaths, it turned into a drop of black oil that looked like molten wax and fell down. When Sima Quan saw that she was actually able to use the twin demon-subduing mirrors, his face immediately turned pale. This meant that his previous judgment was completely wrong. Even here, it didn't prevent her from using the real treasure. However, this also made him very confused. Since she could kill him in an instant, why did she still want to fight him? If she wanted to use him to practice, it was unreasonable to make such a big fuss. Especially when even the Pingdu sect leader came out to help, it was even more impossible for her to have such a goal. Then the biggest possibility left was that she wanted to capture him and bring him back. He couldn't guess what her goal was, but he had to do something about it. So he said loudly, "Taoist Master Pang, you probably want to capture me and bring me back. Although I don't know why, everything can be discussed. If you're not willing, I'll just kill myself here. You also know that I have countless clones. At worst, I'll just start all over again." A hint of disdain appeared in Taoist Master Pang's eyes. She really couldn't capture this demon alive and couldn't refine the pool of 10,000 refinements lightning. She also wouldn't compromise with any demon. Moreover, she had already set up everything, so she didn't care. She flipped her palm, and countless demon-subduing runes appeared in her palm. They immediately resonated with the jade plate above her. When Sima Quan saw her like this, his expression changed. Then, his voice turned cold and he said, "If that's the case, then we'll meet again in the future. When I come out of seclusion, I'll definitely make your entire sect restless." Taoist Master Pang didn't seem to hear his threatening words. She only focused on controlling the talisman. When Sima Quan saw this, he completely gave up. He didn't want to be captured alive, so he circulated his mana and wanted to disperse his chi. However, at this moment, he found that he couldn't move. He immediately revealed a look of astonishment. At this moment, the jade plate above his head shrouded him with a spiritual light. He didn't even have the slightest strength to resist. He was sucked in. Taoist Master Pang let out a sigh of relief. With a wave of her hand, the jade plate fell into her hand. To be continued, search the color, and you can read the following chapters in full. Chapter 1146. Within the small world of the upper extreme hall, two peaks faced off against each other. A torrent of water rumbled past, its momentum was turbulent, and white steam billowed out. Qi Yuntian and Zhang Yan each sat on a mountain, their gazes fixed on the river below. After 10 years of refinement, the forbidden light of the heavenly water was about to be completed. Bursts of light seeped out from the river, and there was a clear gurgling sound. Listening to it was relaxing and pleasing to the ears. Within the light, there was a sense of liveliness and joy, as if it had come to life. In reality, if one delved deeper into it, the forbidden light was not a dead object, but one that had a trace of spirituality. As long as there was enough vitality, it could grow on its own, and even become a real living being. Shen Baishuang's living cloud water sword was also made using this water as a reference. Just now, he had created it. However, he was not a direct descendant of the sect leader, nor did he specialize in the water palace, so he could not obtain the complete refinement method, and could only rely on himself. At this stage, there was no need for Qi Yuntian and Zhang Yan to interfere. They only needed to wait for the final form of the divine water forbidden light. After waiting for about 20 days, the beam of light rose up and soared into the sky. It seemed to have opened up a mysterious hole and continued to enter it. Just as it was about to completely sink into the hole, it seemed as if something had been broken, and the other end of the beam of light poked out from not too far away. At this moment, the light seemed to come from nothingness, and went back into nothingness, without a beginning or an end. Qi Yuntian said, "After 10 years, it has finally been refined." He stretched out his hand and tore off a part of the light, sending it to Zhang Yan. "This is half of the forbidden light of the heavenly water, Junior Zhang, please keep it well." Zhang Yan did not stand on ceremony, he bowed and looked at it. The divine light was like water, it turned into strands and flew into the space between his eyebrows. The good thing about this water was that it had spirituality. It was naturally close to the person who refined it. If it was someone else, they would definitely struggle violently. Even if it was someone else, they would not let it fall into the hands of an outsider. However, he still needed to go back and test it out to find out exactly how powerful it was. Qi Yuntian also kept his portion of the divine light and said, "In the past, when refining the divine water forbidden light, one of the most important external ingredients could only be replaced by the Fuda mysterious water. Fortunately, Junior brother brought back the deep abyss heavy water last time, which allowed us to reproduce the true power of the divine light." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Senior brother Qi is overpraising me. I was able to get the heavy water this time. It was also sect leader Reverend's order that the work of all Reverends was the result of the joint efforts of all the Reverends, not my own work." Qi Yuntian nodded and said, "I wonder how Junior Hua is doing under the CI." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Senior Martial Brother Hua practices the golden fire technique, so he should be like a fish in water in that realm. I hope he can get back in time before it starts." Qi Yuntian said, "That would be best." After the two of them exchanged a few more words, Zhang Yan got up and bade farewell. Qi Yuntian personally sent him out and asked him to stay at the entrance of the hall. Then, Qi Yuntian returned to the Duzhen Hall. For the past 10 years, he was not refining the forbidden light all the time, but only used the spiritual opportunity at the crucial moment. Most of the time, he was still using the deep abyss heavy water to train his mana. The earth-splitting heaven and earth leaf was also being nurtured. After sitting down in the hall, Jingyu came up and said, "Master, the elders have done what you instructed me to do. The talismans are all here." As he was speaking, he bowed and placed a jade box on the table. Zhang Yan flipped through the talismans. The talismans were pretty good. Even if there were flaws, it was not because the elders did not put in the effort. It was because of the limitations of their mana and cultivation base, they could not do better. However, these talismans could not be used yet. The next most crucial step of refining had to be completed by him. So, he instructed. He rolled up his sleeves and brought the jade box in, then walked into the inner room. In the Bu pavilion, Han Zuochen was riding a small boat on the lake, drinking alone. However, he looked a little depressed. There was a ripple in the lake, and a golden dragon leaped out. It gradually changed in mid-air and shrunk to the length of a foot. It landed lightly on the boat and said with dissatisfaction, "Brother Han, you have good wine. Why are you drinking alone and not calling old Ao? You are not loyal at all." Han Zhucheng did not say a word and drank another cup. Ao Tong looked at him strangely and said, "Why, Brother Han, are you facing some difficulties?" Han Zhucheng sighed. "A few days ago, Master called all the senior apprentice sisters and senior apprentice brother to give pointers. Even junior apprentice brother did not fall behind, but I am like an outsider." Ao Tong did not think much of it and said, "I thought it was something big. You should eat as much as you want." "Old Ao, I will be honest, Brother Han, you are not as good as your fellow disciples. Master has seen it clearly and let you be free and unfettered, so why bother yourself?" Han Zhucheng smiled bitterly and said, "I also know my own abilities. It's just that I've heard from a few of my fellow disciples that the great calamity of this world is coming, but I can't share Master's burden. As a disciple, I'm really useless." "Calamity is coming?" Ao Tong rolled his eyes and said hesitantly, "If you really think so, there is a way." Han Zhucheng looked over and said, "Does Brother Ao have an idea?" Ao Tong raised his head and said, "Of course, if I help you, Master will definitely praise you." Han Zhucheng did not believe it and said doubtfully, "Really? If that is the case, why didn't Master come and take care of you?" Ao Tong said angrily, "That is because I, old Ao, did not take out that thing, or else I would have gone to the palace of Duzhen, drinking wine and eating mystical pills every day. Why would I drink such inferior wine here?" Han Zhucheng saw that Ao Tong was serious and asked curiously, "What is it that Brother Ao is talking about?" Ao Tong straightened his body and said proudly, "The Ao clan was ordered by our ancestors to guard a piece of monster skin for generations." Han Zhucheng was surprised. Monster skin? His expression suddenly became excited. Could it be the skin of a heavenly monster? Ao Tong said disdainfully, "Although the skin of a heavenly monster is precious, it is not as good as this." Ao Tong wanted to keep him in suspense but he could not hold it in anymore. He lowered his voice and said mysteriously, "Let me tell you, that is the skin of a Zhua Shao Xian bird, and not just any Zhua Shao Xian bird, it is the most precious flower skin on the back of the king bird." "What? Zhua Shao Xian bird?" Han Zhucheng almost dropped the wine cup in his hand. He jumped up and stared at Ao Tong. "Old Ao, you are not lying to me?" Ao Tong said unhappily, "You are looking down on me, why would I joke about such a thing?" Han Zhucheng sat down and clapped his fist, "If it is really this thing, I will give it to my teacher. If I give it to Master, Master will definitely be happy." Ao Tong said proudly, "Of course, I dare to say that. Even a Taoist grotto heaven like Master has heard of such a good thing. I have only heard of it, but I have never seen it." Han Zhucheng nodded. It was no wonder he was so excited. This Zhua Shao Xian bird was not a simple monster, it was a mutated species that had transcended the restraints of a realm and could travel between realms. After the cultivators from beyond the heavens came, this bird also came not long after. Then, it settled down on the Middle Pillar continent. This bird was even more terrifying than the heavenly monster, especially since it usually fed on cultivators. After it was surrounded by people, it even flew out of the void. At that time, there were about 1,000 Zhua Shao Xian birds that came to this realm, and they were all protected by the wings of a king bird before they crossed the door between the two realms. When the West Continent cultivators and the demons started a war, these bird demons and dragon monarchs joined hands and wanted to destroy the cultivators. However, although the West Continent cultivators suffered from internal strife, their vitality was damaged. With the help of the cultivators from beyond the heavens, their strength did not increase, but decreased. When the two sides fought, the Shaoqing sect's patriarch Venerable Hongba. He climbed to the top of the Middle Pillar continent and killed the entire Zhua Shao Xian bird tribe with just one sword. However, because the continent was too high, even Venerable Yaoan's jade cliff could not protect it, and it collapsed. After that battle, the people on the continent only saw a rain of blood that lasted for several days. The Middle Pillar continent was irrigated by the blood of the demon birds, and since then, it became the most fertile land. There were even exaggerated rumors. The skin of the king bird only needed to be worn on the body. It had the ability to travel through the void. Thinking of this, Han Zuocheng reacted. He asked, "Such a rare item, old Ao, where did you get it from?" Ao Tong said, "I've said it before, the Ao clan was ordered by our ancestors to guard this skin." As he said this, his mood was a little down. "My poor Ao clan, we were targeted by those monster carps, our clansmen were all slaughtered, only I managed to escape." Han Zuocheng heard this and sighed, comforted him, and asked again, "If we guard it for our ancestors, will it be a problem if we go and retrieve it?" Ao Tong answered, "Don't worry, the Ao clan promised to guard it for 10,000 years, if no one comes to retrieve it by then, it will belong to the Ao clan. The time limit is long over." Han Zuocheng hurriedly asked, "Then where is the skin now?" Ao Tong smiled mysteriously and said, "I will not say that first, but that item is really too big, Brother Han, you will not be able to retrieve it." Han Zuocheng asked curiously, "How big is it?" Ao Tong showed off, "An ordinary Xiao Xiao bird is the size of a mountain, the king bird is as big as a continent." Back then, a cultivator from beyond the heavens used this bird as a mount and built a temple on it. Rumor has it that it was because of this that the entire monster bird clan chased after him. "With your arcane energy, how can you lift this thing?" Han Zuocheng was shocked. "According to what you said, how could the Middle Pillar continent accommodate this flock of monster birds?" Ao Tong said, "The king bird no longer needs to stay on land, it usually only roams in the outer space. Coming to the Middle Pillar continent is just a place where it can raise its descendants." "Oh." Han Zuocheng's eyes lit up. He asked, "If that's the case, where are the eggs?" Ao Tong said, "The Xiao Xiao bird clan was annihilated by perfected Hongho alone, if he has any, no one can question him. But from what I can see, even if there are any, they are probably in the hands of the Shaoqing faction. Moreover, this bird only lives for 10,000 years, Brother Han, it is useless even if you have it." Han Zuocheng sighed, "Then, the one who hired your Ao clan to guard this king bird's skin was the ancestor of the Shaoqing faction?" Ao Tong shook his head, "No, it was perfected Hongho who used it as proof of him annihilating the bird clan. Later on, the owner of the Ao clan, who is also a cultivator from the Xianyu Palace of the West Continent, exchanged for it with a hefty price. He, you might not know this, but this Xianyu Palace branch is now the Nanhua faction." Han Zuocheng was surprised. Didn't the Nanhua faction's founding master claim to be one family, no other teachings? Ao Tong curled his lips in disdain. If it wasn't for the legacy of the Xianyu Palace, how would they be where they are today? If no one comes out to expose these words, wouldn't they just be bragging about themselves? Chapter 1147. After Han Zuocheng figured out the origin of the pelt, he was even more eager to send it to his teacher, but Ao Tong refused to reveal its whereabouts. After living with Ao Tong for hundreds of years, he was very familiar with Ao Tong's temperament. Thus, he praised Ao Tong a little and Ao Tong finally revealed its whereabouts. Under the Nine Tunes Stream Palace, there is an underground river. As long as you follow it, you will be able to reach that place. Han Zuocheng waited for a while but did not hear anything else, so he asked again, "What happens after we pass through the underground river?" Ao Tong answered straightforwardly, "I don't know." Han Zuocheng was stunned. "You don't know?" Ao Tong coughed and said, "My Ao clan's grand ancestor once said that the descendants will be able to find something as long as they reach the realm. This is definitely true, or else the Ao clan wouldn't have guarded this place for 10,000 years. Han Zuocheng thought about it and felt that it made sense. No wonder Ao Tong refused to speak just now, it turned out that he did not know much. But then he thought again and asked, "Isn't the Nine Tunes Stream Palace where the Surging Waves Lake is located? It belongs to the Three Pools of Water, so it should be Qinsang School's territory. Why would Xianyu Palace place the door to find the king bird's pelt there?" Ao Tong said, "I heard from my grand ancestor that although Qinsang School occupied a large area of land in the north, it did not have many disciples. Some of the cultivation lands were lent to their friends so that they could help out in times of trouble. And the second grand ancestor of Qinsang School and a few Daoren of Xianyu Palace were on good terms, so this underground river was set up at that time. Han Zhuqing shook his head and said with a smile, "This senior has found a good place to hide his family's treasure using the Dark Azure sect's name. No one would have thought of this even if they cracked their brains." Ao Tong snorted and said, "My poor Ao clan, we thought this place was not dangerous and just now agreed to guard it. But then, the Qinsang School fell into internal strife and the 3 pools were occupied by the 3 tribes, causing our clan to suffer as well." Han Zhuqing sighed, "This is fate. Moreover, the matter is already over, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But sooner or later, my Qinsang School will fight with the North Nether Continent's demon tribe. Who knows, you might be able to get your revenge then." Ao Tong instantly became much more spirited, and he repeatedly walked in circles on the spot as he said, "Not bad, there's a possibility." Han Zhuqing said, "Old Ao, why don't you come with me to the Palace of Purity and inform Master about this?" Ao Tong listened. He lay down on the deck and said, "Grandpa Ao, I won't go." Han Zhuqing asked in surprise, "Why is that?" Ao Tong replied, "This is something that I, Old Ao, have given to you, Brother Han. If I go, wouldn't it be Old Ao's contribution?" Han Zhuqing laughed in spite of himself and said, "It's your credit, and it's my credit. So what? It's fine as long as I can help Master." Ao Tong shook his head and said, "How is it the same? I, Old Ao, am only a pawn under the Master, so the benefits I receive are limited. But Brother Han is different. You are the Master's disciple. It must be a great benefit to me. Besides, you have benefited from it. Don't you want me to benefit as well?" Han Zhuqing did not care about this, but hearing what Ao Tong said made sense. He said, "Although I'm not going for the benefits, if I get anything, I won't forget Old Ao." Ao Tong chuckled and said, "Then it's settled." After Han Zhuqing asked about the location of the underground river and the way to enter, he flew into the sky without saying anything to anyone. He picked a fast-flying spirit bird and went all the way out. Just half a day later, he arrived in front of the Surging Waves Lake. Although he did not doubt what Ao Tong said, but he still decided to explore it himself. This was the place where the sect leader's nominal disciple, Miao Kun, cultivated. However, this person also knew that he had occupied such a large piece of land and was bound to be hated by others. Even if there were disciples cultivating in the lake, he would turn a blind eye and not drive them away. Because of this, when Han Zhuqing arrived here, no one came to ask questions. After circling around the lake, he quickly found the location that Ao Tong mentioned and went down to the bottom of the lake to explore. In just an hour, he found the underground river and dived in without hesitation. 3 days later, he came back from the bottom of the lake, but his face was filled with joy. He adjusted his chi slightly and headed towards the floating heavenly palace. When he was in the sky, he used the talisman that Zhang Yan gave him and a ray of light protected him. He broke through the strong wind and headed straight for the Duzhen Hall. Just now, when he arrived at the empty space in front of the hall, a boy came up to him and bowed. "Sage Han, the hall master knows that you are here. He said that there is no need to inform you. Just enter." Han Zhuqing expressed his thanks and tidied up his attire before stepping into the inner room. He walked all the way to the main hall and saw Zhang Yan sitting high up on the jade platform. He bowed and said, "Disciple Han Zhuqing pays his respects to Master and wishes Master a long life." Zhang Yan first called him up and asked, "You are in a hurry to see me today and you did not send me a letter beforehand. Is there something important?" Han Zhuqing bowed and said, "Master, please understand. I found out where a mysterious item was buried. I did not dare to hide it from you, so I wanted to present it to you." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Since you are so serious, this treasure must be something special. Where did you find out about it?" Han Zhuqing told the whole story and did not take credit for it at all. He only said that he found out about it from Ao Tong and was willing to present it to his master. Left freedom king bird. Zhang Yan looked like he was deep in thought. He was currently searching for precious materials to prepare for the god's trial. If it was really the left freedom king bird's fur, it would be very useful. Han Zuoqing said again, although I found out about it from senior brother Ao, but because it has been 10,000 years, I am afraid that something has happened to the fur. I have already gone to find out the path. The prohibition at the end is not broken. It seems that no one has found this place for many years. I did not dare to enter recklessly, so I came to report to you. Zhang Yan nodded his head. After thinking for a while, he raised his hand and an illusion appeared in front of him. It was the location of the Surging Waves Lake. He said, "Where is the entrance to the underground river?" Han Zuoqing looked for a while and pointed to a place. "It is there." Ever since Zhang Yan broke through the 6 barriers, if no one deliberately covered it up and there was no spiritual opportunity to disturb him, he could see any place on the 9 continents by using his mana. At this moment, he looked over and saw an underground river. Naturally, he did not need to go there personally like Han Zuoqing. Instead, he sensed the spiritual opportunity and followed the source of the river. Very quickly, he found the end of the river. In an instant, from top to bottom, he saw the situation clearly without missing anything. He smiled, waved his hand and said, "Come with me." After saying that, Han Zuoqing felt his vision blurred. When he looked around again, he was already in front of a mountain with lush vegetation and beautiful flowers. He did not recognize it, so he asked doubtfully, "Master?" Zhang Yan looked down and said, "The fur is here." Han Zuoqing came to a realization, "Is it at the foot of the mountain?" Zhang Yan shook his head, "Not the foot of the mountain. If I am not wrong, the entire mountain is made up of the fur. It is just that flowers and trees are planted on it to cover it. If one does not know the inside story and his cultivation is not up to par, even if he finds the place where the treasure is buried, I am afraid it will be for naught." Han Zuoqing was stunned, then he said angrily, "The ancestors of Xianyu Palace are also cunning. They clearly said that the past 10,000 years will be given to others, but they still set up such a trap." He did not really resent the cultivators of Xianyu Palace, but he did not know how he would explain to his master if it was all for naught in the end. Zhang Yan smiled, "This is human nature. Of course, one would not want to let others take away something that belongs to one's family. However, I guess there is most likely something good hidden down there. Even if we can't find the fur, we can use it to make up for the people who came later." Han Zuoqing could not help but nod. He looked at the mountain peak. It was actually not eye-catching, and the spiritual opportunity was extremely restrained. It happened to be south of the Great Lake of Longyuan, outside the range of the Qinsang School's Mountain Gate Formation. No cultivators dared to set up a sect here, so there was no one around, only some birds and beasts lived here. He thought about it for a moment. When his teacher took back the mountain, all the creatures in the mountain would suffer for no reason. He took out a bamboo flute and blew it a few times. Immediately, all the insects and birds in the mountain were frightened. They all scurried out and fled into the depths of the dense forest in the distance. Zhang Yan only watched from the side and did not stop them. When there was no more movement in the mountain, he said calmly, "There's no point in you doing this. Even if you drive away these animals, there are still countless tiny living creatures in the mountain." Han Zuoqing sighed, "I know, but since I can't see them, I can only pretend that they're not here. I just hope that my heart is clear." Zhang Yan did not comment. He waved his sleeve, an array of water light rushed down and absorbed the entire mountain peak, leaving only a deep pit. He said, "You've done well this time. I know that you're not interested in cultivation, but in exotic animals. Why don't you go down and take a look? You might find something." Han Zuoqing thought of what Zhang Yan had just said, and his expression changed. He clasped his hands in front of his chest, and after a while, he came back with an object in his arms. He held it out and said, "Benevolent master, this is the only thing in the room. It's just that this disciple's knowledge is shallow and does not know what it is." Zhang Yan took a look and saw that it was a square jade stone. The edges were very neat, as if it was cut by a sword, and he could not sense any abnormalities. A thought flashed across his mind, and he raised his finger to touch it. After a while, he smiled and said, "There is a living creature sealed inside, but the method is brilliant. If I didn't look carefully, I wouldn't have been able to detect it." Han Zuocheng's eyes widened, and he said, "A living thing? Could it be?" Zhang Yan smiled and said, "You don't have to make wild guesses before the seal is removed. This isn't a place to talk. We can talk when we get back." As soon as he finished speaking, he rolled up his sleeve, and in the next moment, the master and disciple had returned to the Duzhen Hall. After sitting down on the jade platform, he placed the jade stone on it, and then he flicked his finger. A light cracking sound was heard, and the jade stone shattered to reveal the thing inside. Chapter 1148. After the jade piece split open, there was a curled-up green branch inside. The branch was young and slender, but there was a large fruit bud hanging at the front. It looked heavy and bent over the branch, as if it had reached a ripe and plump state. Han Zuocheng was a little stunned. Although this thing was alive, it was not a living thing as he imagined. He took 2 steps forward and said, "Master, this is..." Zhang Yan took a few glances and shifted his gaze to the jade piece. He saw many tiny tadpole-like words on the inner wall, and guessed that it was related to this thing. He reached out and pointed, and the pieces gathered together as if they had never been broken. He glanced down and smiled. He said, "This Xianyu Palace is quite ingenious to come up with such an item." He flicked his sleeve and handed it to Han Zuocheng. "Take a look and you'll know the origins of this item." Han Zuocheng carefully took the jade piece, but the more he looked at it, the more surprised he became. Finally, he looked at the fruit on the green branch and said in disbelief, "This thing is actually a living thing that was born from the essence of plants?" There were many living things born from the essence of plants in the world, but this was different. Xianyu Palace was thinking about how to grow a demonic fetus with the essence of plants. However, it was not easy. The cultivators of the palace studied it for thousands of years, but they only managed to produce this one, and it still needed the spiritual vigor from the left Freedom Bird King's fur to nourish it. Zhang Yan replied, "That's not strange at all. There are millions and millions of worlds in the void sky, and there are many things that have never been heard of or seen before. Being trapped in a world like this, we are merely looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. Only by living a long life and wielding divine abilities can we roam the world, be free and unfettered, and experience that wondrous realm." Han Zuocheng lowered his head in shame and said, "I've really let you down, master." Zhang Yan looked at him and said with a smile, "I don't need to tell you this, you know it too. However, you just want to enjoy the days before you, so you don't want to pursue the illusory path of longevity. That's why you don't want to pursue the illusory path of immortality. There's nothing wrong with that. The path is chosen by yourself. As long as you have a clear conscience, it's fine. You don't have to care about anything else." Han Zuocheng felt relieved when he heard that. Nodding his head, he raised his head and said, "Yes, master." Zhang Yan turned to look at the green branch and said, "This thing looks like it's about to mature. It's just that it's trapped in the jade and hasn't been born yet. However, this kind of creation created by human hands, whether or not the world can tolerate it will depend on its own luck." While speaking, there seemed to be some movement inside, and both of them could sense that there was a young creature slowly struggling inside. However, the fruit shell was tough, and it was unable to break out. However, under the exertion of force, the fruit bud gradually shook, and at this point, it could no longer bear it. With a crisp sound, it fell to the ground. It first smashed onto the table, then rolled onto the ground. Right at this moment, the sound of a fruit cracking could be heard, and a white little beast arched out from within. Its body was round, and there was a short horn on its mouth. It looked like a young rhinoceros. However, it seemed to be afraid of light, and its eyes were unable to open. It tried to stand up several times, but to no avail. It could only moo, as if it was asking for help. Because it was not far from Han Zuocheng's feet, he hesitated for a moment, then bent down to pick it up. After carefully examining it, he said, "Master, this beast seems to be the legendary golden-footed rhinoceros." Zhang Yan said, "It only looks similar. As for what it really is, it's hard to tell. You can handle it yourself." Han Zuoqing said happily, "Thank you, Master." Zhang Yan smiled, "You've given me the king bird's fur this time, so it's considered a merit. If you only give me this, it'll be too unfair." He shifted his gaze, and Jingyu, who was standing at the side, immediately came up and bowed, "Master, what instructions do you have?" Zhang Yan said, "Bring Zuoqing to the storage in the hall. Whatever he likes, let him take it." Jingyu acknowledged. Han Zuoqing hurriedly prostrated on the ground to thank him. Zhang Yan nodded and said, "Go." After his disciple left, he picked up the jade piece again and looked at it carefully. His eyes flickered, as if he was thinking about something. Finally, he rolled up his sleeves and kept all the jade pieces on the table. Then, he rode a ray of light and headed towards the Xuanzi Sea realm. When he reached the center of the world, he went to a towering mountain peak and stood still. He circulated his mana and heard the rumbling sound of water. A ray of water light flashed in front of him and the mountain peak was released again. With a flick of his sleeve, all the water, grass, and trees on it were removed, and the piece of fur below was flattened. Very quickly, it covered the sea within a radius of 1,000 miles. Although it was in the water, it floated and did not sink, like a floating island. Although tens of thousands of years had passed, the entire fur looked colorful, and the feathers were unusually gorgeous. He could clearly see that although this piece of fur was very large, it was unknown whether it was because it was magical or because Xianyu Palace had used some method, but after so many years, it was still exuding vitality. According to the rumors, as long as one wore this King Zuoqing's skin on their body, cultivators could use it to travel in the void. However, he was very clear that this should be a false rumor, or a story made up by a low-level cultivator who did not know the inside story. The left fairy king bird was able to fly through space, and this was a divine ability bestowed by the heavens. However, without a head, a body, a pair of wings, and claws, wanting to accomplish this by relying on a mere piece of fur was undoubtedly wishful thinking. If it was really possible, it would have been seized by the ancient cultivators a long time ago. How could it have been left behind until now? Although this item was huge, it was only useful to a grotto heaven cultivator like him in the middle. It was about 10 feet in size, and it was the part of the fur where the essence and vitality gathered the most. He focused his gaze for a moment, and a sword gleam flew out from between his brows. With a stream of light, it circled around and chopped off the piece of fur in the middle. He then used his mana and it floated to his front. He touched it, and he felt that the big feather was unusually soft and smooth. The spiritual vigor inside was unusually abundant. He thought to himself, the vitality is so strong, like a blazing fire. No wonder the green branch could survive. When he heard about this item earlier, he had some ideas on how to use it. However, after reading the description in the jade slip, he had another idea. It recorded that Xianyu Palace had spent thousands of years creating a blood refinement technique known as the living refinement art. This method was to take the limbs and bones of spiritual birds and strange beasts and fuse them into one. It was then used to refine all kinds of ferocious and strange beasts in the ancient legends. There were even many things that only existed in the imagination of mortals and did not exist in the world. However, this technique was useful more than 10,000 years ago. At that time, there were many different kinds of big demons, and living medicine was easy to find. Hence, the power of the magic treasure that was refined was naturally great. However, the fate had changed now. Even if it could be refined, it could only be used by cultivators who had entered the Yuanying state. Even if it took a lot of effort to refine it, it might not be comparable to an ordinary magic treasure. It was even more worthless to a grotto heaven cultivator. What Zhang Yan was thinking about now was whether he should use this living refining technique to refine the king bird's fur. If he only had this piece of fur, it would not be of much use. However, don't forget that he had killed a few sky demons and obtained many good things. Other than a few that he had given away, most of them were still in his hands. He raised his sleeve and several items floated in front of him. The most eye-catching among them were the 9 origin beads. This item could be said to be infinitely powerful when he was in the yuanying state. When he used all of it, it was simply unstoppable. However, when he was in the image phase state, it was useless. Even if he could hit the Dharma form of a person in the grotto heaven, it would at most break a corner. It was really not of much use to the spiritual chi that spread thousands of miles. It was just that he had not decided how to deal with it. If he could make use of it this time, he might be able to refine a suitable magic treasure. According to the records of the Xianyu Palace, if he wanted to fuse these items together and finally refine them into a magic treasure, he would first need to entrust his divine will to an item. This could be a strange demon that existed in the world, or it could be a monster that had never appeared before and only existed in legends. However, this kind of divine will was not done carelessly. It had to be paid attention to. If the chosen beast was too weak, it would not have much potential and would not be of much help. However, if it was too strong and ferocious, it would only be a waste of precious materials, and it would not be refined no matter what. Previously, Zhang Yan already had a choice in his heart. There was a ferocious beast in ancient times known as Devour. This was a legendary monster that had 100 eyes and 1,000 feet. Its eyes were all located on its back. When it lay on the ground, it would fall into a deep slumber. It could transform into mountains, lakes, fertile fields, and attract hundreds of spirits to gather. When it woke up, tens of thousands of years would have passed. At that time, it would only need to roll up and it would be able to devour all living things on its body. As for Devour, it had a child called Jie. Its size could change. It was like a kite that could fly between heaven and earth and kill all kinds of spiritual plants. It was extremely ferocious. He planned to use this item as divine will entrust. If he had better precious materials in the future, he might be able to further refine it into a ferocious creature like Devour. The Xianyu Palace's sacrificial art only focuses on precious materials. The technique is not complicated, but from what I see now, it seems a little crude. Even when I'm refining, I don't have to wait by the side all the time. However, the spiritual opportunity of heaven and earth has changed over tens of thousands of years. If I don't change and follow the original method, I'm afraid there might be a mistake. I should try a few times first. When he thought of this, Zhang Yan suppressed the thought of immediately refining. He waved his sleeves and kept all the items in front of him, including the fur. He then flew into the sky and arrived at the main hall. Not long after he sat down, the formation spirit walked up and said, "Master, just now, there's a letter from Donghai. Since you're not here, I'll accept it." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "A letter from Donghai. It might be that Tao Jinren has come out of seclusion." He ordered the formation spirit to take a look. As expected, it was from Tao Jinren. The letter mentioned that he had already refined the Chua dragon's soul essence. The formation plate outside South Cliff Continent also stood up and asked if he wanted to continue with the operation. He thought for a while. The opening tribulation was not far away, so it was not suitable for him to move. Just when he was about to reply, he suddenly thought of something. This living refining art is passed down by Xianyu Palace. It has a deep relationship with Nanhua sect. Tao Jinren originally came from this sect. I might as well look for him and discuss it. It might be beneficial. Chapter 1149. Tao Jinren stood in front of the psychic jade wall. When Zhang Yan's figure slowly appeared, he bowed and said, "Greetings, Jinren Zhang." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and chatted with him for a while before saying, "I received your letter, but the situation has changed slightly. In these few years, Tao Jinren, fellow Taoist me, and fellow Taoist Li only need to accumulate their cultivation. I can ask fellow Taoist Li to conceal the array formation plate on the sea. During this period of time, you only need to hide, and there is no need to make things difficult for Yu Xiao." Tao Jinren's expression changed slightly. He could naturally understand the deeper meaning in the words, and he said in a deep voice, "I understand." Zhang Yan nodded slightly and stopped talking about this matter. He changed the topic. I wonder if Jinren has sacrificially refined the soul of the Hui dragon. Tao Jinren replied, I have already stored it in the beast tracking chart. With this item, if I fight against an opponent like Wu Ruyang, I should not be at a disadvantage. Zhang Yan smiled and said, then congratulations, fellow Taoist. At this point, he paused and said, recently, I have obtained a living refining technique. It was left behind in the ancient Xianyu Palace. I have several treasures here, and I am preparing to sacrifice and refine them. However, after all, I am not a cultivator of this sect. Thinking that Tao Jinren has some history with it, I would like to ask Jinren to take a look. Xianyu Palace. Tao Jinren couldn't help but nod and said, I would very much like to take a look. The cultivators of Nanhua sect actually never mentioned that they once had such an upper sect, and they destroyed everything related to Xianyu Palace. At least in Donghua continent, it was very difficult to find traces of this sect. However, the sourcebook of Walking Beasts diagram and the general Imperial Spirit Birds chart were passed down from the Xianyu Palace. The person in charge of the diagram couldn't turn a blind eye to it. When the Walking Beast diagram was passed on to Tao Jinren, he just now knew the name of this sect. Later on, he broke out of the sect and met more and more people. He also visited many ancient ruins, which was why he had some understanding of this sect. After all, they were of the same lineage, and he also wanted to explore the secret techniques of this sect. Zhang Yan raised his hand. Lines of words appeared on the psychic jade wall. It was the refinement method. Tao Jinren looked over, and after he finished reading, he said, fantastic thinking. Taoist Zhang, are you going to use this technique to refine a spiritual item? Zhang Yan, that is indeed my intention. Tao Jinren said, it's a pity that this path is already very difficult. Judging from the technique above, it was easy for him to imitate it, but the living medicine was not easy to obtain. Moreover, the crux of the living refinement technique was the object that was entrusted to it. If he did not choose well, the possibility of failure was very high. Zhang Yan knew what he was thinking, and said with a smile, Tao Jinren should know that I have many heavenly demon shell remnants in my hands. Moreover, I have obtained the fur of a left freedom king bird, which can be used as a carrier. Tao Jinren was also surprised. Could it be the left freedom king bird that crossed the sky 10,000 years ago? Zhang Yan said, it is the king bird that was killed by Taoist Hongho. Tao Jinren thought for a while and said, I heard that the left freedom king bird's fur is magical and full of vitality. When it reaches any world, it can slowly adapt to that world. If there really is such an item, it can be used to unify many treasures. Zhang Yan said, but I think that the incantation used 10,000 years ago should be used carefully. We cannot use it the same way, and it needs to change according to the times. Tao Jinren agreed, Taoist Zhang's concern is not unreasonable. He thought for a while and said, what I have learned previously is somewhat compatible with this Tao. Taoist Zhang, why don't you tell me the treasures that you need to refine into it? After I go into seclusion for a few days, I hope I can find the method to unify it. Zhang Yan thought for a while and felt that it was a good idea. After all, in this aspect, Tao Jinren was the expert, so he bowed and said, then I will have to trouble Taoist Zhang. Tao Jinren said that he did not dare, and said, in about 7 or 8 days, I will have a definite answer. Zhang Yan nodded and said, then after 10 days. I will discuss it with Tao Jinren. He withdrew his spirit from the jade disc and sat for a while. Then, he flew out of the Xuanza ocean world and into the sky, stepping into the azure sky hall. The manager here, Su Su, sensed her master's arrival and immediately led a group of servants to welcome him. Zhang Yan said, all of you go do what you need to do, I am only stopping here for a while, I will leave after a while. Su Su nodded and led the crowd away. Zhang Yan looked up at the sky and looked around. After more than 2 hours, his eyes were fixed on one place. Then, he leaped up and turned into a ray of light that traveled into the void. This time, he released his mana and used his sword light to travel. After half a day, he arrived in front of a large cauldron. Back then, Fu Baoxing and Wang Kaiwei were ordered by him to kill the disciples of the Xianin Palace in the void. After this cauldron was destroyed, it had been floating in the sky. However, he did not come to see if there were any demons occupying this place, but to test the power of the divine water forbidden light in his hand. Therefore, the power of the light was so great that he could not really practice it in the 9 continents or in the small worlds. Only here, where he was surrounded by boundless space, he did not have to worry about anything. When he got closer, he touched the center of his brows. An illusory and dazzling light surged out and quickly turned into a ray of light that circled around his body. The head and the tail of the light entered the void, and he could not see where it ended. With a thought, the light flashed and went above the palace cauldron. In the blink of an eye, it entered. At first, there was nothing strange, but after a while, the entire palace cauldron silently shattered into countless pieces, and each piece was no bigger than a palm. However, this was not the end. All the pieces turned into fine dust in a few breaths' time and finally dissipated into the void. The divine light flashed again and returned to its original place, still circling around his body. He checked a little and found that the divine light was less than half of the original. However, this palace cauldron was not easy to destroy. It could survive in the void until now and was not damaged by the poisonous fire and strong wind of the sky for at least 10,000 years. One could imagine how strong it was. Even if he attacked with all his strength, he could not do it in such a short time, which showed the destructive power of the divine light. After this test, he already knew in his heart that when he fought in the future, as long as he used the divine light to attack with all his strength, even a Taoist Wonderland master with a protective treasure might not be able to withstand it. If he was lucky, he might be able to break the Dharma on the spot and kill the opponent. As for the half that was lost this time, it was not a problem. This water had spirituality. As long as the root was not damaged, it would be able to replenish itself with spiritual opportunity when he returned. If he urged it, the speed of replenishment would be faster. With a thought, he kept the divine light back into the center of his brows and rode the sword back to the 9 continents. This time, he did not rush forward like when he came. It took him almost a day to return to the Duzhen Hall. He sat on the jade couch and slowly recovered the mana that was lost during the trip to the void. When his divine chi was full, he took out the talismans that were refined by the elders on duty. With the guidance of his mana, one of them floated up gently. With a flick of his finger, he hit a spell on it. Suddenly, there was the sound of a bell on the talisman, and a magnificent fire floated up. The original apricot yellow talisman gradually turned into a greasy white color under the calcination. He casually grabbed a spiritual opportunity and pressed it on the talisman. There seemed to be starlight overflowing from it. It was dazzling and beautiful like the sunset. It was very pleasing to the eye. After about 3 days, the talisman was finally refined, and it fell onto the table with a clatter. It had actually transformed into a jade talisman. Zhang Yan looked at it and the jade talisman turned into a light and flew into his sleeve. There were more than 100 of them. It would take about a year to refine all of them. However, compared to the effect of the talisman in battle, the effort was worth it. He continued to refine the talisman and soon, it was the appointed time. He closed his eyes and sat down to communicate with the spiritual opportunity. The psychic jade wall in the small world of East Sea started to shake gently. Tao Xinren was near the altar. He felt the movement and walked over. He injected mana into the jade wall and the psychic jade wall lit up. Zhang Yan raised his hand and smiled. Tao Xinren, have you learned anything these few days? Tao Xinren replied politely, after these few days of enlightenment, based on the wisdom of the predecessors, I have come up with a suitable sacrificial method. Xinren can take a look. I wrote it in a hurry and there might be some omissions. If Xinren sees it, please do not hesitate to correct me. He took out a silk book from his sleeve and opened it in front of the psychic jade wall. Zhang Yan glanced at it and noticed that compared to before, this sacrificial refinement technique hadn't changed much, but quite a lot of external medicines had been added. They weren't living medicines, but some things condensed from vital energy. Tao Xinren explained, all the external medicines are mostly obtained from the sky demon. Although they are not as good as the left freedom king bird, they are not far from each other. They can be combined and refined at the same place. However, this sacrificial method has not reached the stage of turning the dead into life. It is using the original vitality and spirituality of the living medicine. Some of the parts that should be bridging qi and walking back and forth are too stiff. It is only relying on the strong spiritual vigor of heaven and earth to force it. Therefore, I have used hundreds of external medicines to guide and adjust it. It should be much smoother. Zhang Yan nodded and looked away. He said, "Thank you for your trouble, Tao Xinren." Tao Xinren bowed slightly and said, "Xinren is too polite. However, I have to remind you that even if the spiritual item is refined, it is not naturally produced. I am afraid it will not be tolerated by heaven and earth. It can only be used for a while and not for a long time." Zhang Yan thought for a while and asked, "Xinren, how long do you think it can live in this world if it is refined according to this method?" Tao Xinren said, "I privately speculate that if it is not used normally and left to fend for itself, it can live for 200 to 300 years. However, if it is used in battle, it can only live for half a year at most." Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, "That's enough." He did not care about this. Once the tribulation of man began, he would definitely face the most dangerous battle since he entered Tao. As long as he could get through it, he was willing to give up all the external things he had. When the situation was settled, or when he went to another world, what treasures could he not find? If he could not get through it, he would die in the end. What was the use of saving these things? Now he had to use all the means to turn all the treasures and external medicines that he could use into help. As for how long he could use it, there was no need to think about it. Chapter 1150. Time flew by. It had been 10 years since Zhang Yan obtained the left freedom king bird's fur. Over the years, according to the secret method he discussed with spiritual master Tao, he used 2 hours a day to refine this item, and the rest of the time was used to hone his magic power and nurture the magic treasure. In the main hall, he sat cross-legged on the jade couch. In front of him was a soil platform. It was slightly suspended in the air and was only a finger away from the ground. It was not bigger than an arm's length, but it was as tall as a person. It was hollowed out and filled with the deep abyss heavy water. This platform was built with the imperial soil. This soil was nourished by the spiritual vigor of the heaven and earth for billions of years. As long as there was a spiritual formation carved on it and mana was added, it could float in the sky. In ancient times, the flying mountains and floating islands were mostly supported by this soil. However, as the spiritual vigor of the heaven and earth deteriorated, this strange soil was used too much in the past. Now, there was not much left. Even in the hall of Du Zhen, there was only this much. This was the only thing that could support such a heavy load of water. It was not supported by the palace's prohibition. After Zhang Yan channeled his mana for a long time, he flipped his palm and channeled his mana. The water slowly floated out from the soil platform and towards his palm. As the water increased, it slowly rotated and floated upwards. It was just a line of water, but it actually made the sound of surging waves. This deep abyss heavy water was fine when it was not moving, but when it rotated, it was so powerful that almost nothing could get close. Even the light in the world seemed to be swallowed by it. The water quickly reached a height of 100 feet, but it did not disperse. The clouds above were long gone. Even the cloud dragons that were patrolling in the hall avoided it and did not dare to get close. After channeling his mana for half a day, even Zhang Yan felt that his mana was running out. In the past, when he fought with cultivators of the same generation for such a long time, he did not use up so much mana. This showed how difficult it was to control this heavy water. After channeling for another 2 hours, he just now slowly stopped and put the water back into the soil platform. He thought, although this will help me a lot in training my martial arts, it is still not enough. Even if I train for another 10 or 20 years, I won't be able to do it. Now that I'm familiar with the water, I can try to enter the water to cultivate. If I can hold on for a while, I'll be able to cultivate. In that case, it won't be long before I break through the seventh barrier. The heavy water was too heavy. Once a cultivator entered the water, their entire body would be under the pressure of the water. Even Taoist heavenly abode's magic power was slightly weaker. Immediately, his conjured body collapsed, and his flesh and bones turned into mud. But he did not only cultivate Chi path, his strength path was also at rank 6, with his body and his previous training, he could resist this water power. He calmed his mind and began to regulate his breathing. Half a month later, he was able to sit down and meditate. At this moment, his essence, Chi, and dermic powers were completely restored. Thus, he stepped on the void and arrived at the top of the earth platform. Looking at the pool of heavy water below, he slowly sank into it. He focused on cultivating his magic power here and did not care about anything else. Soon, 5 years passed. On this day, Jingyu came to the front of the soil platform and reported, "Master, a child came to the hall. He said he brought a decree from sect master." Zhang Yan slowly stood up from the heavy water, water droplets rolled down his robe. He waited until he was completely out of the water before saying, "Call him here." Jingyu received the order and left. Not long later, a child came to the hall and bowed, "Greetings, Hall Master Ji Zhen." Zhang Yan said, "What is the purpose of sect master's decree?" The boy hurriedly took out the decree. Zhang Yan used his magic power to take the decree and opened it. His gaze flickered slightly and he nodded, "Go back and tell sect master that I already know about this." "Say that I already know about this." The child lowered his head and said, "Then, I will take my leave." As he said this, he bowed and left. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve, and the decree turned into ashes, leaving only a jade tablet in his hand. He kept it and was about to sit down to regulate his breathing, but right at this moment, he suddenly felt something strange, and turned his head to look in the direction of the side hall. Ever since Ning Chongxian, the palace lord of the side hall, entered this world, there had been qi activity leaking out and sword qi overflowed. For so many years, it had never stopped. However, just now, the qi activity suddenly weakened, as if it was about to be cut off. Even Jingyu also noticed the abnormality and said, "Master, is this a sign of insufficient spiritual vigor?" Usually, when a cultivator was approaching the gate of the grotto heaven, there would be a period of qi activity rising. If it was smooth and the preparation was sufficient, then there would be a great chance to cross over in one go. But if there was not enough momentum, then before he could really touch the gate, he would have already lost his hope. Zhang Yan's magic power was the strongest among his peers. That was why he did not have any difficulties when he was here in the past. At this moment, he sensed a little and thought for a while. He said, "This is not a lack of spiritual vigor, but a method to suppress it first and then release it later." What Hall Master Ning cultivated is the Thousand Cloud Snatch Sword scripture. This method is different from other methods, so you should have this experience. The former Hall Master of the Hall of Purity Truth, Zhui Yuming, cultivated the Thousand Cloud Snatch Sword scripture. He had left behind many insights. He also roughly flipped through it and knew that after cultivating this method, if one reached the gate of the grotto heaven, then the sword qi on one's body would always be spreading out and robbing the spiritual vigor of the outside world to continuously replenish the loss. At this time, what one needed to do was not to move forward bravely, but to suppress the qi activity and even weaken it on its own. Only by doing this repeatedly could one achieve success. But this step was easy to say, but it was extremely difficult to do. In the past years of Qinsang school, there were many talented cultivators who stopped at this gate and could not take a peek at the higher level of cultivation. Looking at the current situation, not only was it not a bad thing, but it was also smooth sailing. But after that, there would be a series of twists and turns, which was equally dangerous. And this kind of thing could only be done by the cultivator himself, outsiders could not interfere. He retracted his gaze, sat with his legs crossed and went into meditation. After only one day, his mana was fully recovered. He stood up, turned into a clear light, and flew out of the small world. He came to the outer hall, took out the jade tablet and waved it, and a formation door opened in front of him. He did not hesitate and stepped in. In the blink of an eye, he was in a small world. In front of him was a quiet valley, everywhere there were cicadas singing and birds chirping. A clear mountain spring flowed from high up, and on the other side of the river, there was a hut. In front of the door, there were several green bamboos. At this time, there was a young man lying on a blue stone by the river, but when Zhang Yan looked over, he suddenly shuddered and rolled down from the rock. When he got up and saw Zhang Yan, he was shocked at first, then he was overjoyed and shouted into the hut, "Grandmaster, someone from Qinsang school is here." A voice came from the hut, "Don't shout, I already know." A middle-aged cultivator walked out. He was wearing a brocade robe and a jade belt around his waist. It was Gan shouting, who came from Dongxing State. He bowed and said, "So it's Xinren Zhang, I'm sorry for not going out to meet you." Zhang Yan smiled and returned the bow. "Xinren Gan, you are too polite." Gan shouting said, "Xinren Zhang, you must have something to teach, then please come inside to talk." He then told the disciple, "Go and invite Xinren Ji here." The disciple bowed and flew away. Zhang Yan followed Gan shouting to the hut and sat down. When the servant served tea, he asked, "How are the two of you staying here?" Gan shouting said, "The spiritual vigor here is abundant, far better than my dilapidated cave abode. The two of us have cultivated here, and our skills have improved a lot." Zhang Yan said, "That's good." Gan shouting looked at him and said, "Although the scenery here is good, I have not returned to my sect for a long time, I miss it." Zhang Yan smiled and took a sip of tea before bluntly saying, "Since I've invited you two here, I won't let you go so easily. I'm sure fellow Taoist Gan is aware of this." Gan shouting, on the other hand, was not annoyed. He was just a little surprised. He pondered for a moment before cupping his fists and saying, "Enlightened Zhang, may I be so bold as to ask you a question? Restraining us here and not allowing us to leave, is it to make things easier for the Deep Abyss sect? If that's the case, the two of us can make a solemn vow that when we return, we will only guard our own mountains and will not come out to fight with your sect." Zhang Yan shook his head. Gan shouting thought for a while and said, "If Xinren Zhang thinks that it's inappropriate, then the two of us are willing to leave Dongxing State and live on the sea. As long as your sect is still in Dongxing, we will not return." Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Xinren Gan, you don't have to test me. Why would I invite the two of you here for such a small matter?" Gan shouting thought for a while and said, "Then what is your sect's intention? Can you tell me so that I can have an idea?" Zhang Yan looked over and said, "I invited the two of you here to do something for my Qinsang school." Gan shouting's heart skipped a beat. He smiled bitterly and said, "We are ashamed. The two of us are much weaker than the Xinren of your sect, how can we help your sect?" Zhang Yan raised his hand and pointed outside. He said, "Taoist friend, you should know that because there are more and more cultivators in this world, the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth is weakening day by day. If this continues, there will be a day when there will be a great disaster, just like the West Continent in the past." Gan shouting felt even more uneasy. He lowered his head and thought for a while. He said, "That's true, but forgive me for being blunt. Even when that time comes, I'm afraid that Taoist Ji and I will be long dead. What will happen in the future have to do with us?" Zhang Yan laughed and said, "What will happen in the future? The disaster is already right in front of us, how can there be any future?" When Gan shouting heard this, his body shuddered and he looked at him in disbelief. Zhang Yan stood up and walked to the door. He said, "Even if I let the two of you go, do the two of you think that you will be safe after hiding in Dongxing State? If that's true, then everyone can avoid the disaster by hiding there. From the moment the two of you entered Dao, you are already in the disaster. Whether you are willing or not, you can't escape it." Chapter 1151. P.S. There was a typo yesterday. It was the 5th transformation of the strength path, not the 6th transformation. Thank you for pointing it out. Gan shouting sat there for a long time and said dryly, "I understand now. You want us to enter your sect's formation and face the calamity together. Is that right?" When he came to the Donghua continent, he knew that this was not the Dongshan continent. Every major sect had several people from the heavenly abode in charge. Even though the Yutzang sect was one of the best in terms of ability, once people like them got involved, they would definitely die. Zhang Yan turned around and said, "Jinren Gan, my sect does not want you to fight against the truth path. I have something else to ask of you." Gan Shouting's heart was heavy. Qinsang school had imprisoned them for so many years. What they wanted to do was definitely not simple. Zhang Yan said, "Jinren Ji is not here yet. I will tell you when he arrives." The small world was vast. Ji Xiangping was not willing to stay in such a secluded place. He went to the seaside alone. When he arrived, it was already several hours later. After greeting each other in the hut, he sat down. After exchanging a few words with Gan Shouting, Ji Xiangping roughly understood the purpose of Zhang Yan's visit. He said, "Since I'm already here, there's no need to beat around the bush about your esteemed sect's plans. Please speak plainly." Zhang Yan's gaze suddenly became profound. He looked at the two and said slowly, "My Qinsang school intends to dig up the roots of the earth and seize the qi of the earth." What? The two had cultivated for more than 2,000 years. But when they heard this, they could not hold it in anymore. They stood up at the same time, their expressions filled with disbelief. Ji Xiangping said with a trembling voice, "The spiritual opportunity of the 9 continents originates from the roots of the earth. Is your sect not afraid of becoming enemies with all the cultivators in the world by doing this?" Zhang Yan smiled indifferently and said, "It is not to the extent of becoming enemies with all the cultivators in the world. My Qinsang school is doing this because we have allies. We will advance and retreat together." Seeing how calm he was, the two of them slowly calmed down after their initial shock. Gan Shouting stared at him. He said in a deep voice, "Then why is your esteemed sect doing this? Was it because there was not enough spiritual opportunity in the world? But I see that your sect has an empty spiritual cave, at least the spiritual vigor of a continent. It seems that there is no need to do so now." There was fighting spirit in Zhang Yan's eyes as he said in a sonorous voice, "If we allow this world to continue to deteriorate like this, there will be a big change sooner or later. At that time, we can only sit back and watch others make a move. Rather than passively facing the calamity, we might as well take the initiative to make a move and open up a new world." The two of them were shocked by his words, and they couldn't help but take 2 steps back. At the same time, their hearts were filled with complicated thoughts, and they actually stood there speechless for a long time. After a long time, Gan Shouting cupped his hands and said, "Jinren Zhang, I still don't understand. Does that mean that your esteemed sect has moved the earth's roots and extracted the earth's energy to alleviate the crisis? Isn't this like drinking poison to quench thirst?" Zhang Yan said, "There is naturally a reason for this. But don't worry, my Qinsang school won't seek its own death for no reason. When the time is right, I will definitely give you an explanation." The explanation he gave was also to make the two of them more obedient. As for what exactly he would do, there was no need to explain it to them now. Gan Shouting and Ji Yunshu actually regretted what they heard. Now they couldn't say no even if they wanted to. They were very clear that if they dared to say no now, they would probably end up badly. Gan Shouting sighed heavily. He said, "Then what does your esteemed sect want us to do?" Zhang Yan said, "Nothing else. Please go to the earth's roots and extract the earth's energy. The rest of the matter has nothing to do with the two of you. When the time comes, it is up to you whether you want to leave or stay." The two of them had already sorted out their thoughts. After hearing this, they were not that agitated anymore. Gan Shouting smiled bitterly, "Your esteemed sect thinks too highly of the two of us. Although I am not knowledgeable, I know that the earth's roots are extremely deep underground. On the outside, it is covered by the Hun Yuan earth barrier. There is also the origin magnetic true power that disrupts the spiritual vigor. With our mana, I'm afraid we can't do it no matter what." Zhang Yan said, "You don't have to worry about this. If the two of you agree, my Qinsang school will naturally have a way to help the two of you. I only have one question, are you willing or not? The two of them did not speak. The hut instantly fell into silence. Zhang Yan did not rush them. He only waited quietly at the side. After a long time, the two of them seemed to have finally made a decision. Gan Shouting took a step forward and bowed deeply to him. Half probing and half pleading, he said, since your esteemed sect thinks highly of me and fellow Ji, then we shall not refuse. We are willing to accept this matter. However, if anything unforeseen happens, I hope that your esteemed sect can take care of our mountain sections. Zhang Yan shook his sleeve. A jade token floated into midair. In a split second, it emitted a ray of light that was several feet long. A formation door was opened. Then, a contract flew out from the inside and landed on the table. He pointed and said, the two of you only need to sign this contract. Then, you are one of us. The sect behind you is also my Qinsang school's ally. It is reasonable for us to take care of you. The two of you need not worry. Gan and Ji saw that he was pressing on and did not give them any chance to think. They were helpless. Seeing that there was no way out, they could only walk forward and pick up the contract to take a look. Unexpectedly, it was not harsh. Instead, it was very generous. It promised that as long as the matter was successful, it would guarantee the safety of the two of them. After the two of them finished reading, they looked at each other. Then, they took a strand of their soul and life essence. They turned their qi into a seal and engraved it on the contract. Once the contract was formed, it instantly turned into 3 rays of light. 2 of them flew into the space between their eyebrows. The last one returned to the formation door. Seeing that the purpose of his visit had been achieved, Zhang Yan smiled and said, there are still many details that need to be sorted out in this matter. However, there is no need to rush. Someone will come another day to discuss in detail with the two of you. I will take my leave now. Gan and Ji hurriedly bowed and said, Jinren Zhang, take care. Zhang Yan nodded. He pushed the jade token and turned to walk into the formation door. Very quickly, he disappeared with the door. After he left, Gan Shouting let out a long sigh and said, this time, we are tied together with Qinsang School. Ji Xiangping's expression darkened. She said with some irritation, there are so many people in Qinsang School. They don't want to do this themselves, but they want us to do it. Can't you see the meaning behind this? Gan Shouting shook his head and said, so what? If we don't act according to Qinsang School's wishes, I believe they will attack us to prevent the news from leaking. At that time, even our souls will be hard to protect. If we take this path, at least we have a chance of survival. Ji Xiangping snorted and said, I want to know, if we really refuse just now, will Qinsang School dare to start a war with us here? Aren't they afraid of destroying the mountain gate? Gan Shouting sighed and said, if Qinsang School dares to tell us about this, they must be prepared. Besides, the contract has already been signed, what else can they do? Now, we can only hope that they can succeed. After Zhang Yan passed through the formation door, he came to the Supreme Hall. Qi Yintian was already standing on the stairs waiting for him. When he saw him, he bowed and said, Junior brother Zhang is here. Zhang Yan returned the greeting. He looked around and saw 9 jade pillars erected in the middle of the hall. They were as thick as the hall's pillars. They were about 3 feet high, pure white and flawless. There was no spiritual vigor leaking out from them. He took 2 steps forward and said, is this the 9 Qian determining pillars? Qi Yintian also walked down and said, yes, it is. My teacher once said that 100 years after sect master Jinren ascended to the position, he started to sacrificial refine this item. In these hundreds of years, he has refined more than 30 pillars. However, only these 9 pillars are the most useful. With this item, even an ordinary grotto heaven cultivator can break through the Hunyuan earth barrier and enter the earth aperture. Zhang Yan nodded. The sacrificial refining method of this pillar was originally passed down in the West continent. At that time, due to the gradual decline of spiritual vigor in the 3 continents, a few sects secretly built this pillar to absorb the earth chi. At first, no one noticed anything unusual. When the sects realized that something was wrong, it was already too late. This directly led to a battle. Fortunately, at that time, there was still a way out, so everyone did not end up dying together. But now, there was no way out. He retracted his gaze and turned his head and said, "The 2 of them signed the contract today. I think they are still not satisfied. We shouldn't force them too much. Let's wait for a few days and then send someone to send it over." Qi Yuntian thought for a while and nodded, "Let's do as junior brother says." Zhang Yan and Qi Yuntian discussed for half an hour and then came out from the upper extreme hall. However, he did not return to the Duzhen hall. Instead, he rushed to the Qing Tian hall. When he came to the door of the hall, he waved away the servants who were waiting outside and walked in. As soon as he entered the inner room, he saw a prismatic object on the jade platform in front of him. Its body was extremely flat, about 10 feet wide. The fur on its body was bright and smooth, but in the middle, there was a black profound mark, as if someone had drawn it with a brush. If someone who didn't know the details saw it, they would only think it was a soft blanket, but from its slight breathing, they could see that it was a living creature, but they couldn't tell where its head was. This was the vicious object that he had refined using the living refining technique. Although he had entrusted it with his divine will, it was hard to know what it would look like in the end, and what kind of abilities it would have. He could only wait for it to be refined. Just now, he could find out. And now, he was not far from that step. He walked forward and put his hand on it. In an instant, there was an inexplicable feeling in his heart. As if it had sensed his arrival, the object shook slightly. Densely packed eyes of different sizes opened on its body. There were about 100 of them. As the eyeballs moved, they were overflowing with ferocious light. Long whiskers floated out and gradually extended, swaying in the hall. At the same time, hissing sounds could be heard, as if it was extremely happy. Zhang Yan tried a few times and found that this object also had intelligence. It was comparable to a 4 or 5-year-old urchin. Moreover, it was refined by him. As long as he thought about it, it would understand what he wanted. So he said, "Since you have a spirit, I should also give you a name. Your appearance was entrusted by me with the son of Datun. Its original name is Jie. But you are different from it. Today, there is a great calamity to pass. So I will call you Jie." Chapter 1152. In Pingdu sect, the hidden appearance pagoda suddenly shone brightly. Precious pearls hung down from the top of the pagoda, and thousands of strands of clear air flowed like dust being washed away. Everyone standing below felt refreshed, and even their own auras became livelier. Which god era suddenly, the pagoda door opened, and a ray of light shot out. Pingdu sect master Qi Hengchan walked out of the pagoda. However, compared to before he entered seclusion, he was like a portrait imprinted in this world. Although he was no different from an ordinary person, he seemed to be in a different world. Perfected Master Wu and Perfected Master Zhao only took a glance and were forced to keep their eyes open by the spiritual light above his head. They quickly lowered their heads and walked forward, bowing. "Congratulations, Perfected Master, for coming out of seclusion." Qi Hengchan raised his hands and smiled. "Perfected Masters, please rise. When I was in seclusion, I had to thank you for guarding the sect. Thank you for your hard work." Perfected Master Zhao said, "This is what we should do. We don't dare to call it hard work." Perfected Master Wu straightened up and said, "Perfected Master, are you?" Qi Hengchan nodded and said in high spirits, "With this opportunity, I have broken through the 6th barrier and formed an origin fetus." Although they had already guessed the result, the 2 perfected masters were excited to hear it from him. There were 16 major sects in Donghua continent, and almost all of them had people from Grotto Heavens guarding them. However, most of them were hovering before the 2nd barrier. There were very few people who could form an origin fetus, and most of them only existed in the major sections. If the sect had a third-stage cultivator, their reputation would immediately change. From then on, as long as Chi Hong-chan was in the sect, no one would dare to look down on Ping Du's sect as a small sect. Just look at the Yuanyang sect. It was because of a talented person like Chu Rui that they were able to support the sect. Sometimes, they didn't even have to give face to the three major sections. Chi Hong-chan saw their expressions and shook his head. Perfected masters, things are not the same as before. If I had reached this realm a few hundred years ago, I could have pushed our sect even higher. However, the great calamity is before us. There is no such chance. Zhao and Wu calmed down, they cupped their fists and said, "We have forgotten ourselves." Chi Hong-chan asked, "Did Chinsung School send any letters while I was in seclusion?" The two of them moved to the side, allowing a disciple to come forward. He held a jade box in his hand. When he got closer, he bowed and held it up. He said respectfully, "Headmaster, there was a letter from Chinsung School and a letter of thanks from Huanjin Temple." It was stated that it was for Headmaster Jinren. Chi Hong-chan took out the letters from the jade box. He first brought the letter from Huanjin Temple to his eyes and opened it. He saw that it was from Pu Xianqing from Huanjin Temple. The content of the letter was to thank him for helping Immortal Pang capture the heavenly demon last time. He also said that if he had the time, he would like to personally pay a visit to thank him. This was not an important matter, so he put it aside for now. He then took the letter from the Chinsung School and read it. This time, his expression froze. He waved his hand at the disciple and said, "All of you can leave first. I have something to discuss with the two Zenrins." The disciple bowed deeply and walked back down. He called out to all the disciples and servants standing at the side, and after bowing, he turned around and left. After they bowed, they all left. In a short while, they were all gone. The three of them rode on the breeze and rose to the white jade platform. Immortal Wu asked cautiously, "Headmaster Jinren, is there something important in the letter?" Chi Hong-chan said, "Because I have an appointment with Headmaster Qin, I can't tell you the details yet. You only need to know that Pingde cult is ready to act at any time." Zhao and Wu were shocked. They knew that this day would come, but they didn't think it would come so quickly. They looked at each other and bowed at the same time. They said, "We will wait for Headmaster Jinren's instructions." Chi Hong-chan said, "When I was in seclusion, I had already roughly refined the hidden aspect pagoda. This pagoda is an ancient wonder. Because my cultivation has not reached perfection, I can't fully understand its changes. However, I can only use it now. Pingde cult will at least have a way out in the great calamity, so the two of you don't need to worry too much." At this point, he turned to look at the scenery of the mountain gate below. It's a pity that when this calamity comes, this important mountain gate of Pingde cult will most likely be difficult to protect. The two elders were extremely shocked when they heard this, but they followed the rules and didn't ask any more questions. Chi Hong-chan said, "I will travel outside in the next few days and go to the Chinsung school. Everything in the sect will be as usual. Don't let anyone see anything unusual." Zhao Jinren said in a low voice, "We will obey headmaster's orders." After Chi Hong-chan gave his instructions, he was about to return to the pagoda to cultivate. However, just now, he was about to take a step when his figure paused. His eyes shone as he looked toward the north. Jinren Wu followed his gaze but didn't see anything. He couldn't help but ask doubtfully, "Headmaster?" Chi Hong-chan thought for a moment and said, "It's nothing. I think fellow Taoists from the Chinsung school can handle it." After saying this, he turned around and leaped toward the spiritual eye in the sky, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Zhao Jinren and Jinren Wu bowed to send him off. They only stood up after his figure disappeared. Zhao Jinren sighed. "I originally thought that after the precious pearl returned, there would be one more seat on the pagoda. If there were a few hundred years, we could try to promote a disciple to go up against the calamity. But from what headmaster said, we won't be able to make it in time." Jinren Wu, on the other hand, was full of confidence. He said, "If we feel that it's too hasty, then the other sect's preparations must be even more inadequate. Instead, we have the advantage. Just as Zhao Jinren was about to speak again, his expression suddenly changed. He turned his head abruptly and saw a spiritual cloud soaring into the sky from the north. He and Jinren Wu looked at each other and both of them leaped into the sky at the same time. They gathered their energy and looked over. They saw that it was a beam of light that penetrated straight into the high clouds. Jinren Wu said, looking at that direction, "It's from the northern dark star continent. It's just strange that this light is scattered but not condensed, and the spiritual opportunity is not abundant. Someone must have deliberately fiddled with it, but I don't know why they did it. They didn't use up their own mana." Zhao Jinren said, "Maybe it's that northern dark star demon cultivator playing some tricks. Headmaster just now is aware of it. He said fellow Taoists from the Qinsang school can handle it, so it shouldn't be a big deal." Jinren Wu nodded and said, "Then we don't have to worry about it. We don't know when the calamity will descend. The time is pressing, so we should go back and prepare early." After the two of them finished speaking, they flew off in different streaks of light, returning to their respective caves. The commotion was so big that the Zenrins from the Qinsang school immediately sensed it. They all stopped cultivating and looked in the direction of the northern dark star continent with inquiring eyes. Zhang Yan was in the upper extreme hall at the moment. He had already sensed it before the light appeared. His gaze was focused on the beam of light, and his eyes were cold. Qi Yintian said, "The area occupied by the Lord Yuanjuan's forbidden matrix has only expanded by half in this short period of time. There's still the figure of the matrix spirit in the light, and it's even more secure than before. If the demon court had such a trick before, they would have done it long ago and wouldn't have waited until now. There should be people from the Yuxiao school behind this." Zhang Yan said, "Once the power of the palace guarding matrix has increased, we won't act rashly before we have absolute confidence. We can only allow these demon cultivators to continue to exist in the northern dark star continent. This must be their goal." Qi Yintian said in a low voice, "This can be done in secret, but they purposely made such a big fuss. This is obviously a show for us, the Qinsang school. The meaning behind this is to say that the demon court has the support of the demon court, so they don't fear our attack." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "This is also expected. When the forbidden matrix was erected in the South Sea, the Yuxiao school had to be on full alert in order to protect their backyard. Now that there's no one to disturb them, they will naturally extend their hands elsewhere. I have already suppressed half of the northern dark star continent, and I think I have offended them. They are extremely afraid that we will wipe out the hidden danger of the northern dark star continent, so they are using some means to salvage the situation." He thought for a moment and said, "But we, the Qinsang school, have not been doing much recently, and even did not insist on setting up the matrix in the South Sea. The Yuxiao school must have grown suspicious, and may want to take this opportunity to see our reaction." Qi Yintian changed his mind and said decisively, "No matter what reaction we make, it may arouse their suspicion. The more we hide, the easier it is to be exposed. We don't need to care about them, we just need to do our own thing. The hundreds of years of planning of the Qinsang school is just like the surging waves of a mighty river, but it is not something these little tricks can stop." Zhang Yan nodded. But no matter how the situation changed, the demon court of the northern dark star continent was the main target of the Qinsang school, or they might be attacked from two sides. His arrangement in the South Sea was also for this purpose. But similarly, if Yuxiao wanted to make a move, the first place they would clean up would be their own backyard. He thought for a moment and said, "We will not fight with him in the open, but we can use force in the dark." Compared to the forbidden matrix of the palace of Yuanjun, the matrix board that fellow Daoist Li left in the South Sea is far from comparable. If we really fight, if Yuxiao uses all his strength, it will not be difficult to break through it in a short period of time. If we have not broken into Yuanjun's palace by then, we will be at a disadvantage, so we need to think of other ways. Qi Yintian said, "Junior brother Zhang has been setting up in the South Sea for a long time, I think you already have an idea." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Originally I did have an arrangement, and I have reported it to the head immortal. But now that the situation has changed, I naturally can't stick to the old rules. My idea is that since we can't attack Yuan Jun's palace before the disaster, we might as well send senior brother Hua's 36 mountains to the South Sea. It should be enough to hold back Yu Xiao for a while. Qi Yuntian thought for a moment, nodded and praised, this is a good plan. Originally, Hua Xian had made the 36 mountains to take care of the demon court before the disaster. Now, due to various reasons, it seemed that this matter could not be completed smoothly, so he might as well send this treasure to the South Sea to suppress the Matrix Board. Even if it was not as good as Yuan Jun's palace, it would not be too far off.